I don't know how much longer I will have the stomach for this job. Sure, the pay is good, but I find myself more and more troubled by the things that I have to collect and the people who I have to interact with. It seemed like a great gig at first, but the more that I've been at it, the more that my concerns mount. If it was not for Sarah, I would not be doing this at all, but she needs me and I will not let her down again. Regardless, it was another day to make a collection, another debt settled for Mr. Salazar. The aftermath got me thinking about my reservations for this line of work again, and I consider it even now. But enough about my concerns. Here's what happened the other day. I had arrived at the location and parked my car outside the house of another target, a bit further down the road to not attract too much attention. I thought that he would be home at this point and I had to make sure that I was ready. I looked at the collection notice and almost did a double take. It was another weird one, though I suppose they all have been weird so far. I looked at the list to double check and sure enough it read just the way that I thought that I saw it. One teardrop from a shattered dream. The item seems very specific, and if I had not been doing this for a few weeks now, I might have not known what Mr. Salazar wanted. I read more of the writing of collection on the man that I was to extract the item from. I sighed when I saw it was another poor and desperate soul who had made a deal with the devil and lived to regret it. I winced at my own analogy and considered how on point it really was. Something was very off about Mr. Salazar, but he always paid well and I was not going to start re-examining his motives now, not when there was a job to do. I got out of my car and grabbed my toolkit and walked towards the house. The light was on inside and there was a glimmer of lights in motion in the living room, likely watching TV or something, I figured. That would make this easier. It would be nice to catch them off guard so a fight wouldn't be necessary. I looked left and right to make sure that nobody saw me lingering on his porch and I pulled out the skeleton key and inserted it into the door. It slowly opened on loud hinges and I winced at the sound. I hoped that he hadn't heard it. I stepped in and carefully tried to close the door behind me. I paused and thought that I heard motion in the living room, but it subsided. He might just be shifting in a chair or something. I walked slowly to the living room and sure enough, there he was. Scott Bergman, client of Mr. Salazar, and delinquent on an outstanding debt. It never seems to have an actual monetary values printed on these collection notes. Only the name, the failure to pay, and the strange item that is to be collected. I took a breath and I reached into my coat pocket to produce my Beretta. It might be overkill in this situation, but a lot of people I have visited so far have had firearms of their own, and I've been shot at enough in the last few weeks to not take any chances. I stepped into the living room and my footsteps are masked by the loud volume of the TV showing some college football game. As the sound dies down after a big play on the screen, I clear my throat loudly and say, "Hello, Mr. Bergman. Who's winning?" He whipped around to see who was in his house and nearly fell out of his chair. I thought he was about to reach for something when I stepped forward to ensure the sight of my pistol was fully visible. He froze and I took a step and requested that he, "Please sit down. I am just here to talk for a bit and inquire about what is owed." He sat back down and glared at me, unsure of what to say and knowing that he was in a bad spot. Despite the threat, I had no intention of shooting him unless he gave me a reason to. I was here to collect what Mr. Salazar wanted and it would require a conversation. He finally decided to speak and nervously said, Okay. I know what Mr. Salazar said, but I just needed more time. I can't go yet. I needed to see her one more time." I tried to determine what he meant and found myself wishing that I knew a bit more about these bizarre deals that Mr. Salazar struck with these people. Though I thought about some of the things I had seen so far and reconsidered wishing to know too much. I needed to find out more about who I was dealing with. "What sort of work are you in, Mr. Bergman? Or Scott? May I call you Scott?" He nodded his head without responding directly, as if he was considering if he should really talk about his work, but he looked down at the gun pointing his way and managed a weak. Construction. I am in construction. I nodded my own head and responded, while looking around his living room to see rows of old high school football trophies. Construction, huh? Well, that is a nice, honest profession. Makes me wonder how you got roped into dealing with Mr. Salazar. No, wait, please, don't tell me. I really don't need to know. Though from the looks of things, it was not your first career choice. I told him while gesturing to the football trophies. He looked over at them and back at me and did not respond. He was being a bit tight-lipped, and it was making this harder than it needed to be, to get what I came for. I kept the gun trained on him and set my case down on the ground, and I reached for the tuner. The tuner was what I called the strange oblong crystal that Mr. Salazar gave me. I did not like to use it every time since it gave me a killer headache afterwards, but I was breaking and entering, and I didn't want to linger here for too long in case somebody saw me here and things got messy. I rolled the thing over in my hands and stared intently at the center. And then I threw the tuner to Mr. Bergman, and he caught it without thinking about it. Good catch. You did play college ball, didn't you? I told him as I saw the refracting light washing over his face and the hypnotic pattern that it always did. Scott Bergman was dead to the outside world for the moment, and as he stared dumbly into the crystal, I took it back from him and braced myself as I stared into the object and felt my spatial awareness altering. I saw training, drills, formations, and calling plays, throwing, catching, running, and everything over and over again. This guy had been a quarterback. I continued looking on and saw a pretty girl. He spoke to her at lunch, and he walked her home almost every day. They shared a kiss under the high school bleachers. Her name was Claire, and Scott thought that he loved her. He wanted to be with her, but he had to move away. He had to go, to make his dreams of going pro come true. I felt the guilt emanating from the decision. I saw the tears, the heartfelt appeal in the breakup, and then I saw the injury followed by the depression, and then academic failure, the lost hope of what he had wanted most in life, and I knew that I had what I had come for. I felt bad forcing this man to relive those painful moments, but I tried to steel myself against it. I knew some of his story, but not all of it. I am sure if I looked deeper, I would see something less appealing and sympathetic. At least, and that is what I always told myself. I covered the crystal and snapped my fingers, and Scott came back to his senses. He cried out and then remembered where he was and put his hands up before getting out of his chair. He asked again, "Please, what do you want? I have nothing left to give. Just tell Salazar that I can find a way to repay him without going." I braced myself for the worst part, and I spoke again. "Now, Scott, I want to believe you, but I know you. I know you are lying to me and to yourself, just like you did when you said that you would let her go and find her again when you were an NFL star. This is what you told Claire, wasn't it?" His eyes widened, and I could tell that he couldn't believe that I had known that. I saw a flare of anger cross his features, and I cocked the hammer on the Beretta to cool things down and keep him from making any dumb decisions. Before he could respond with the inevitable, "How did you know?" I cut him off and spoke first. "You said it would be worth it. You told her that you had to try and follow your dream. Your dream was to be a star. Hers was just to be with you. You have achieved something impressive. Most people can only shatter their own dreams, but you managed to destroy two for the price of one. Every day you think to yourself, what if? What if I had just stayed? Would she still be here? Well, nobody can really know the answer, but you wanted to know, you wanted to see. And now there is a price to be paid." I saw tears welling up in his eyes, and the pain underneath was difficult to look at. I found myself wishing that I was just here to break his legs and take his wallet. Breaking his spirit is so much worse. I stepped forward and he flinched back, but I grabbed his head and put a small vial up to his right eye and collected the teardrop from the painful reminiscence of a man's shattered dream. I stepped back and the man broke down and wept openly. He continued crying softly and apologizing to the memory of his lost love even as I turned and left the house. His tortured mind was too preoccupied with the past to even regard my own departure. I closed the door and walked back to my car, clutching my head in pain. That damn thing always gave me the worst headaches. I tried to focus on my own discomfort to not think about what I had made that man go through. I had no idea what Mr. Salazar would do with this grim trophy, but after this one, I felt worse than I normally did. I tried to banish the guilt and drove away from the house and towards my employer. At least somebody would be happy today. I drove back to the simple storefront that functioned as Mr. Salazar's business. It was strange that he had so many clients considering the obscure nature of his operation. Though I suppose with these sort of things he offered, he probably wouldn't have a friendly little general store. I chuckled to myself briefly at the thought of him running a legitimate business, and I steeled myself as I stepped out of my car and prepared to face my employer. I walked in and Lucia greeted me without even looking up from whatever she was working on with her computer. I returned the greeting and asked her, "Is the boss in?" Almost rhetorically, since I knew Mr. Salazar was always in as far as I had ever seen. She still did not look away from the computer and responded with a curt, "In the back." I thanked her and proceeded towards the back room, and Lucia finally looked up and said, "Did you get shot at again today?" A slight smile on her face as she asked it. I wasn't sure if it was a joke or actual concern, since I had been shot at before on some of these jobs. I wasn't sure how to take it, and I just shook my head and her smile widened. "Well, that's good then. The last collector was not as handsome, and it would be a shame if you got shot up like he did." She was grinning ear to ear now, and I couldn't tell if she was messing with me or flirting. Lucia was a strange character, the only other employee that I knew of that worked for Mr. Salazar. She handled all of the administrative work and did so with consummate efficiency, though not much enthusiasm, as she was clearly dispossessed of the desire to be working here any more than myself. When dealing with me, she always switched between passive disinterest and genuine concern over my comings and goings. After a few weeks, I still could not figure her out entirely. Honestly, her interest in me was not entirely one-sided. She was very attractive, and even though I know most workplace romances do not go well, I must admit that I found myself receptive to any attention that she showed me, though I would have to tread carefully. Despite her desk job and small frame, Lucia was surprisingly dangerous, as a belligerent client found out when he was beat down and thrown out by her single-handedly after getting too friendly with her. I decided to take her at her word, and I smiled back at her and responded, "Thanks for your concern, Lucia. I'm okay. Nothing crazy this time, just a bit of a headache, which is preferable to getting shot." I didn't know if you cared. I gave her a coy smile and she reciprocated and said, "Well, of course I do. Also because finding a replacement for you that is desperate enough to work here would suck." She laughed, and once again I couldn't tell if the joke was just that or hiding an element of truth. She continued as saying, "Just be careful out there. Oh, and I will see you back here with a new collection notice from the boss if you're up for it." I thanked her again for the concern and the notice, and I stepped into the dimly lit back office. I always hated stepping into Mr. Salazar's office. I didn't scare easy, but the place gave me the creeps. Always dark, cold, and dank, like a tomb, serving double duty as office space. I brushed my concern away and proceeded. As usual, Mr. Salazar's office was poorly lit. It seemed the only light sources were the individual display lights on many cases of random curios and knickknacks that he had acquired. I know now that the significance of some of these was more concerning than I first thought. It was oddly humid as well. He seemed to always keep the heat on. How there was so much moisture in the air, I didn't care to guess either. I walked in a bit further and approached the large oak desk. I saw Mr. Salazar sorting a strange array of curiously colored vials. He turned to me, and his disturbing features contorted in what could best be described as an attempt at a welcoming smile. The sight of him smiling always sent a chill down my spine. I wondered briefly what horrible vision I would see if I ever used the tuner on him. I immediately regretted the thought and suppressed a shudder. I knew why he was smiling. He only ever seemed cheery when he was going to receive a collected item from one of his clients. He pushed his horn-rimmed glasses up a bit on his narrow and gaunt face and regarded me. "Hello, Henry. I hope everything went all right with Mr. Bergman. I trust that you obtained it." He held out a hand expectantly, knowing that it would not likely have returned without something for my efforts. I withdrew the vial of Scott Bergman's tear from my coat and winced at the memory of his ruined dreams for happiness. I handed it to Mr. Salazar and he accepted the offered vial with morbid glee, and I swear I felt a chill pass through me when I handed the item to him. Mr. Salazar placed the item on his desk reverently, and the unbridled glee on his face when scrutinizing the teardrop made me uncomfortable. In my experience with Mr. Salazar, I preferred when he was his normal dour and somewhat severe self. He often was very strict and impatient when performing any other task or deal that did not involve his collection. The satisfaction that he got from looking at the array of bizarre arcana was disturbing, and he held a particular taste for the items that were extracted from clients' lives, especially the ones taken at great emotional cost. He turned back to me and his creepy smile started to fade, and he patted his hands down on his suit and addressed me again. "Acceptable work. Lucia has your payment ready to go now, and I'm sure that she has already told you there's another collection that I would like you to make as soon as possible." I tried to hide my grimace. I did not feel up to doing another job just then. As I attempted to conjure up an excuse, Mr. Salazar's eyes took on a piercing and imperious look that concerned me. Looking into the menacing gaze, I knew that the option to decline was not really on the table. I tried to shrug off my concern and responded with a half-hearted, "Yes, I can do another one right now, I suppose," though I was hoping to get a quick break in to see my daughter. Mr. Salazar's eyes narrowed and he paused a brief moment before responding. "I see. Well, Henry, if you're not committed to helping when and where you are needed, we can always find somebody who's willing to put in the time. I am sure your daughter appreciates having food to eat and shelter and all the other fun things a child might want, with a loving father who takes care of her needs and wants for nothing. I am sure she appreciates it so much that she would understand when his important work might conflict with a visit every now and then." The disturbing smile was back on his face, and the suggestion and veiled threat were not lost on me. I guessed I would be back at it again sooner than I had expected. My shoulders slumped and I suppressed a disappointed sigh before responding. "All right then, Mr. Salazar. I'll take care of the other collection today as well." "Excellent. I knew you were a smart man, Henry. In fact, I knew right from the start that you were the right fit for this job. As a side note, you might not want to take your car to this one, just a suggestion. You will see what I mean in time." He laughed and clapped me on the back as I was departing the office, and I felt his long fingernails scraping my back through my shirt. My skin crawled and I was equally uncomfortable and annoyed. I didn't know why he did not explain his cryptic clues more before the job. I think he withheld information on purpose, just as some stupid game. As usual, I would have to figure it out myself. I stepped out of the office and back into the main storefront, and Lucia was there waiting for me, holding the collection note out to me before I even had asked. She smiled and said, "One man's job is another man's extortion. Here you go, hon." I sighed and took the paper. Before I could look at it, Lucia also held out an envelope which I knew was likely my payment for the previous work. I reached for it and she pulled it back at the last moment, grinning while saying, "You weren't thinking about taking this windfall without asking the beautiful brains of this operation out to dinner to celebrate." She grinned at me, and once again I couldn't tell if she was serious or not. I was intrigued and decided to call her bluff and responded, "Of course not. Why would I never dream of forgetting to offer a celebration to the beating heart of this fine establishment? We would be lost without you, my lady." I performed a fake bow and flourish and continued, How does dinner tomorrow at 8 sound? If I don't get shot before then, that is." Lucia smiled, and I caught a gleam in her eyes that was more genuine and less playful than before, and I realized she really was happy that I was asking and it was not a trick. I didn't need the tuner to see that she really did want to spend some time with me. She held her hand to her chest and pretended to consider her answer before chuckling and responding, "Oh, if you insist, I can pencil you in for that time. See you then and take care out there." I left feeling conflicted on many things. I was happy that Lucia and I apparently had a date scheduled now. I also felt terrible that I would be missing another chance to see Sarah. I could see her more if Mr. Salazar let me go home every once in a while, though I knew that it was not just him stopping me. She did not live with me anymore, so it's not like if I went home, I would get to see her anyway. At this point, I knew that her mom was likely telling her that I was a bad father and I could see her more if I wanted to. I guess it was not completely wrong. I could see her more if I wanted to, but also if her mother let me visit her more. I thought about her mother, my ex-wife Nancy, and I grimaced. Our marriage fell apart when I lost the job that I had before this one. We had been having trouble for a while, and when our financial security was threatened, it made everything worse. We were barely scraping out a living for our family on the meager part-time pay, and then Sarah got sick and things got even worse. I was so desperate for money that I started getting into some illicit work. It helped make ends meet and take care of Sarah's mounting medical bills. Yet the situation left me in a rough spot so that, when we separated, Nancy got custody and I had to continue supporting them and myself. That desperation led me to work for Mr. Salazar, who had collected something from one of my previous bosses. He was impressed with my determination and somehow knew too much about my story before meeting me. He offered me a job with an eye-watering payday and completion of these collection contracts. How could I refuse? All the good this money does when I can't take any time off. I didn't know what sort of honest work I could get at this point with my record. So, despite the situation, I was not going to be quitting anytime soon, no matter how many times Mr. Salazar asked for insane things, or how many times I got shot at. I have to do my best for Sarah and make sure that she's taken care of. My reminiscing was cut short, and I remembered the contract in my hand and what I had agreed to do today inside. It was going to be a long night. I looked over the collection note and saw the name, Derek Willis, and the item to be collected. A man's pride and joy. I saw the item and balked at the ambiguity once more. My mind conjured a few ideas on what it could mean for this man. There were a lot of things that could fit that criteria. I would have to see what this Mr. Willis considered his pride and joy. The location was not too far from the office storefront, and I made decent time. There was a small garage located near a dingy-looking mobile home. It was dark and there was nobody around outside, but as I approached, I thought that I heard the laughter of children in the house somewhere. This guy had kids. My heart sank and I considered the collection item. A man's pride and joy. I swallowed hard and took a reflexive step back. I didn't want to kidnap anyone's kid, let alone give them to Mr. Salazar. The idea was horrible, and just imagining somebody taking Sarah and giving her to Mr. Salazar, it terrified me beyond description. I didn't know the whole story, and this might not be so cut and dry. I would likely need the tuner to find out for sure. I stepped closer to the door and I tried it. It was open. I did not draw a weapon since I knew children were present somewhere in the house. In fact, I didn't want to confront Mr. Willis at all in the small mobile home when his kids could overhear. I noticed the garage nearby and thought maybe I could take him by surprise and bring him in there. I backed away from the house and moved toward the garage. The door had a large lock on it, despite the main house being unlocked. I thought it was odd, and so I drew out the skeleton key from my toolkit and I opened the large padlock and stepped inside. The first thing that I saw was an impressive-looking but slightly gaudy muscle car. It gleamed with the shine of a recent-looking wax job. I stepped closer to admire the finish, but as I looked at the polished surface of the car, I saw something in the reflection behind me, and I rolled to the side just in time to dodge an attack leveled at my head. When I whirled around, I saw who I presumed was Derek Willis, his face contorted in rage. In his defense, this did look bad. For all he knew, I could be a carjacker or some robber breaking in. Unfortunately, I did not have the luxury of time to explain the situation. Not that he would care to hear the real reason either. "Who the hell are you and what are you doing here?" He shouted at me while pointing the baseball bat that he had in his hands at me. I held up my hands in a mock surrender and I spoke. "Derek Willis, I presume. Pleasure to meet you. I am here on behalf of our mutual acquaintance, Mr. Salazar. You have something that is owed and I am here to collect." I saw a brief flash of concern on his face as he heard Mr. Salazar's name, but the concern vanished and was replaced by the same furious and hateful look that he had before. I figured he was unimpressed and was emboldened by his presumed superiority in the standoff, being the only one of us that was armed. Before I could make another appeal, he spoke first. "I would say you have 5 seconds to get the hell off my land, but I know that you would just come back. Maybe if I break every bone in your body and send you back to Salazar, that creep will leave it alone. That weirdo's trick didn't even work beyond a certain point. It is all going wrong. It is not a miracle, it's a curse. I have lost almost everything that I made before on those races. He is a fraud and he has a lot of audacity saying that I owe him." I shot him a disarming smile as he stood a few feet away from me, seething with rage. I spoke again. "You see, the thing about that is..." I quickly tried to draw my Beretta, but he was faster than I expected and the edge of the baseball bat that he was swinging caught my hand. My gun was hurled out of my grasp and into the window of the car, a loud chipping sound ringing out as the gun struck the windshield. Upon seeing the gun strike his car, Mr. Willis went into something like a blind rage, and I was suddenly fighting for my life and dodging surprisingly powerful blows from the bat. He was screaming and spitting at me, saying that he was going to kill me for that. His mad fury drove me into the corner of the garage and away from the car and my pistol. I saw a nearby toolbox near the floor at his feet and I kicked it out toward his feet, partly tripping him. I looked for something else nearby to give me an advantage, but as I was looking around, I saw that it was not just the two of us in there anymore. There was a young girl standing in the doorway watching our melee and looking scared. Mr. Willis saw the girl and shouted, "Catherine, go inside, I'll handle this. It's some 2-bit robber and I don't want the police here to try and protect this idiot with all the laws that protect thieves nowadays. No, I'm going to teach him a lesson, just like I'll teach you one if you don't get back in the house right now." I used the distraction to pull out the tuner and as Derek stomped towards me with murderous intent, I leapt forward and braced myself as I held the crystal out and grabbed his bat. We wrestled for control over it and I pulled it free from his grasp. While he reached to retrieve it, I held the tuna crystal out and forced it into his hand near where he clutched at the handle of the bat. His eyes went wide and then fell back into his skull. He was out and I looked over to see Catherine as I heard her name was, watching her comatose father in morbid fascination. She wasn't scared of me or the situation anymore. She only looked at him, unresponsive and lying on the floor. My mind, meanwhile, was being flooded by memories. I saw a larger house, 2 children, a loving wife, a glimmer of happiness and fulfillment. I looked further beyond the past and then I saw less appealing things, the anger and resentment. The woman leaves, the man resents her and the children they had together. Drinking, violence, car races, betting. I see new women, the car in the garage looks brand new. There is a windfall of luck betting on races, a brief flood of cash, spent quickly on everything except his children. I keep expecting to see happy memories or some feeling of pride and happiness with his kids. But as the memories go on, all I see is the car in the garage here with us, cleaning, waxing, polishing, modifying, and racing. I see the kids and I figure it is going to change and now I'll see memories of pride in the children. But all I see is a belt and a punishment when there was an accident in the garage and the car's paint got scratched by an honest mistake. I was starting to get angry myself now. Despite relief at realizing that I was not here to do a kidnapping, I also felt bad. This man's pride and joy had been found. I had laid eyes on it well before seeing the scarred face of his child. It was the damn car, not the kid. All he felt was resentment and obligation to the kid. I was angry because I knew that his only pride and joy was that stupid car. The kid deserved better. Whatever this guy's excuse was for getting divorced and his family being broken up, his kids deserved a better father. I felt mad and guilty because I was here to steal this man's pride instead of being with Sarah. Was I any better? I shook the thought out of my head and proceeded. I suppose this made it easier then to get what I came for. I looked over and saw his daughter was still watching, and I told her to go back inside and wait with her sibling. Her eyes shifted a bit, but she listened to me, and without uttering a word, she walked out of the garage. I removed the tuner from Derek's hand, and he started to come back to his senses. As he did, I punched him in the face as hard as I could. My hand hurt from the impact, and he spat out a bloody tooth and was dazed and choking on the ground. I stood up and I kicked him in the ribs for good measure. He cried out in pain and rolled onto his side. I reached down and took the keys to his car from his pocket, and I heard a soft whimper of, "No, no, don't take her." For a moment, I thought again that he might be talking about his daughter, but then I remembered that he was talking about his car. I was tempted to just grab the bat that he had and wreck the thing right in front of him. I still had a job to do though, so instead I tied him up to the garage door and sat next to him as his bleary eyes focused again and he regained some lucidity. I crouched down to his level, and as his eyes narrowed and he was about to spit some sort of curse at me, I spoke first. "I'm not going to kill you, Derek, though a part of me would very much like to. That is not why I'm here. I found what I was sent for, and I'm taking it to Mr. Salazar. You can have your miserable life, but I am taking your pride and joy. Maybe when it's gone, you'll remember that you have something here with you that you can actually be proud of. Maybe then you can get back to taking care of them instead. They deserve better, and from what I saw, you were better ones. I didn't see everything. I do not know everything. Every reason that you had for doing what you did to get to this point. But I know that you could be better for yourself and for them. Hell, we all could be better. I will leave you with that chance, only because your kids need you. But just know that if you waste it and you do not do any better by these kids, or worse if you hurt them again." I paused, letting the imminent threat sink in, and I continued. "While I might make it a special project of mine, apart from my debt collection job, to come back and pay you another visit, you would not like the toys that I would bring for a second visit. I don't know if Mr. Salazar ever told you about a little thing called the excruciator, but let's just say you don't want to know why it's called that. Take care and be better." I left Derek Willis on the floor of his garage, still looking furious but too afraid or injured to try and follow me as I drove his beloved car out of the garage and down the road. I hoped that some of what I had said would sink in, but only time would tell. I felt guilty again as I recalled the look in his daughter's eyes and thought of Sarah. I needed to take my own advice and to be better for her. It had been some day, and I had a lot to think about for the very short drive back to Mr. Salazar's office. I sighed ruefully, but remembered that at least I had a date tomorrow. Surprisingly, Mr. Salazar and Lucia were both out of the office when I returned. I ended up parking the Pride as it was in a reserved garage that a note left by Mr. Salazar had instructed. I thought it was odd, but I was too tired to care just then. When I got home to get some rest, I saw that I had missed a call from Nancy. She was, of course, chastising me for not showing up to visit with Sarah. I couldn't really blame my ex-wife, though. I was busy with the last collection, and I had missed the one chance I had every week to see our daughter, and if the roles were reversed, I wouldn't be very understanding either. I tried to call her, and it went straight to voicemail. I left a half-hearted excuse about being slammed at work, but I couldn't even make it sound convincing, since I didn't really believe it was a good excuse myself. I managed to get some sleep after tossing and turning. I still had a bad headache. Sometimes they could last for hours after getting inside somebody's head with the tuner. If it was not needed to help understand the targets, I wouldn't use it at all, and I morbidly mused about any unknown side effects of using such a potent device. I wondered if it was dangerous long-term and that if it could give me a brain tumor with how uncomfortable it felt. Beyond the pain though, the worst part was the dreams. Being in somebody else's mind is rather traumatic to your own sense of self, and it plays its worst tricks while you sleep. When the mind tries to reconcile its sense of self, it gets scrambled by all the false memories that do not belong, and it creates very vivid and uncanny dreams. I see others' lives, their thoughts, their fears. It is like a fading after image, but they feel real in that moment, and the dreams can quickly turn into nightmares. I was relieved that Mr. Salazar didn't have any new jobs for me the following day. A bit of rest would be nice. I appreciated the break but was disheartened when I finally got a hold of Nancy and she would not agree to let me see Sarah on a weekday to make up for my mistake. The bright spot to the depressing break in between jobs was that I had my date with Lucia that night. It was something that I was actually excited for. I arrived a little early and met her at a nice restaurant downtown. When I saw her, I was blown away. She normally wore very professional business attire at work, but when I got to see how she was dressed up to go out, my jaw hit the floor. She looked absolutely stunning and I suddenly felt very underdressed. Despite my relative fearlessness when it came to violent collections with equally violent criminals, I was suddenly very intimidated. Lucia saw me approaching, smiled beautifully and greeted me. We got a nice table and were soon enjoying some drinks and each other's company. We tried to not talk about work too much out in the open, but it was hard not to, with how much we had to talk about, especially without the prying eyes or ears of Mr. Salazar. Lucia laughed at a lame joke that I made about how Mr. Salazar was always maddeningly cryptic with his instructions. She agreed and mentioned that, "Oh, that man is so strange. Honestly, even with the day-to-day of running the business end of things, he just can't speak plainly. And getting basic finance information is like plying the ancient sphinx with questions." I laughed at the joke in mutual frustration that we felt. The humor left her face and Lucia took on a more somber tone. She took another sip of wine and continued. "I have an idea, though, of what he does to the people in debt to him. I am not ignorant of it. Realistically, if I did not need to take care of my little sister, I would probably be working somewhere else too. I think he knew enough about us and our situations to bring us in, knowing that we didn't have many other options to get by. Preying on the desperate with the skill of the loan shark or illicit businessman, and even though his money has been good for us, I don't trust him in the slightest. We could both be doing more and I fear something happening to one of us as well. The other concern is not just the money that we need, it's the type of clientele that he keeps. All of them give me the creeps and I hate having to deal with them. The worst have powerful connections, and if they found out who we were, well, I don't care what happens to Salazar, but what if they found us?" She trailed off looking concerned but unable to articulate the full extent of her worry. I tried to comfort her and told her, "Yeah, I know what you mean, it is tough. We're going to be okay though, and we have each other's backs now." I smiled at her and continued. "In my case, if it wasn't for my daughter, I probably would be doing some more respectable work, like being a bouncer at a club or something." We shared a laugh, and as I tried to lighten things up, but I saw that same concerned look lingering on her features, and she spoke again. "I mean it, Henry. You have other talents, I know that you do. You don't need to go and work here forever. With the type of work that he's having you do, no matter how careful you are, something bad is going to happen one day and then." She paused and looked away with real fear evident on her features. I was about to speak and she turned back, looking at me with a tinge of panic visible on her normally calm and collected visage. "Well then, your daughters might not ever see you again, and everybody else who cares." She reached out her hand and held mine in the simple gesture of knowing that somebody cared meant more to me than I could say. I held her hand for a moment and could not suppress a deep and sincere smile. I was speechless and I could not think of a response to the honest and humbling gesture. After a moment, I leaned forward and I kissed her. I was afraid that I had overstepped, but as if she had expected me to do just that, she pulled me in and returned the gesture with a passion that surprised me. We finished our meal and I was about to offer to drop her off at her place, but she insisted that we go back to mine. Oh, come on, it's too early to call it a night. There is so much more that we could be doing. She had a knowing grin on her face and I returned it at the suggestion. Despite how tired I felt, I did not get much sleep after all that night. I woke up to an empty bed and 2 messages on my phone. One from Lucia apologizing for leaving but saying that she had to get to the office right away. The other message was from the man himself, Mr. Salazar. He sent a very direct and unusual demand for me to get there as soon as I could. I got up and got dressed and headed out to see what was up. Probably another job. When I arrived, I saw Lucia poring over several record books, and when I stepped in, I shouted my customary, "Hey Lucia, is the boss in?" I gave her a wink, but she didn't look up from the books and just nodded her head and said, "In the back." I felt a bit dejected. Was this whole thing going to be disavowed now? And then I thought about Mr. Salazar and considered that she might not want him knowing about our relationship. I shrugged off the feeling and convinced myself that that was the explanation. I stepped into Mr. Salazar's office and I heard glass shattering. Hells damn that pompous buffoon. The arrogance. To take what I gave him, what I did for him, and not give even a fraction of what is owed. I made him. I'll unmake him. I lingered near the door as I saw the deranged and frenzied look on Mr. Salazar's face. It was made more horrible by the sickly dim light reflecting off of the shattered remnants of some glass curio that he had thrown at the ground. It had a pale liquid inside that pooled out around his chair and onto the floor. The dizzying reflection gave him an otherworldly and monstrous appearance, and I swear that I saw things in the reflection that were not really there with us. At least I hoped that they weren't really there with us. I swallowed hard and steeled myself as I stepped inside to try and determine what he wanted from me. Mr. Salazar finally noticed me standing there, and his grimace of anger subsided into a slightly more neutral glower of impatience. He spoke and his voice was still tinged with a hint of the fury that he had expressed before. "Henry, there you are. Certainly slept in this morning, didn't you? Next time answer your phone more promptly. These matters do not always have the luxury of waiting for you to get your 8 hours in." I didn't respond to the criticism other than to nod and wait for him to continue. "Very well then, come here, I have another job and you're going to need a few new tools." I didn't like the grim smile in his face as he indicated new tools, but I followed him to an odd-looking antique cabinet in his office. He held out a hand and then produced a needle with the other hand. Before I knew it, he was stabbing his finger with the needle, and when droplets of blood started welling on his finger, he placed it onto the lower middle drawer and I heard a clicking sound. He pulled the unlocked drawer open and reverently removed a small metal box. He covered it in a black cloth and wheeled around looking straight at me. He thrust his hands out and offered the box to me. I saw his blood staining the cloth and his cold, unblinking eyes scrutinizing me. It made me just want to back away and run out of there. As impatience started to flare in the intense stare, I gingerly accepted the strange box. And then he spoke again. "You will need this for the next task. Only open it when in the presence of the target, and only take it out when you're ready to collect what is owed. When you know it's time, just say it and the object will handle the rest." He handed me a piece of paper with the target and the item to be collected, and before I could examine the collection note, he suddenly screamed at me. "Well, what are you waiting for? Get out of here and get it for me now." I didn't need to be asked twice. I turned and rushed out of the room and heard another glass object shatter against the wall as I closed the door, leaving Mr. Salazar raging and ranting in his office. I didn't even want to know who or what could elicit such a reaction from him. I was feeling very unsure of this next task. I started to walk out, but I looked up and caught Lucia's eye, and she rushed over to me and grabbed my arm. She whispered softly as if Mr. Salazar would hear us if we spoke normally, even during his uncontrolled rage. "I'm sorry. I just thought it would be the best if we kept this between us. I feel very uncomfortable about Salazar knowing that there's something going on between us. Every twisted deal that he has held over others, there has always been some sort of leverage that he has had, some details that he knew about his clients. Something just feels off, and I think if he found out, he would try to exploit that information to gain somehow. I know that I'm being paranoid, but please, I really do like you. It's just that we can't. Not here, at least." I nodded in agreement. I knew that she was right, but it still felt bad knowing that if we had to keep up the pretense, there would be little time that we could spend together. I was about to leave when she held onto my arm and spoke again. "Tonight, I'll come by later. I can make us dinner and we can decompress from today. Just stay safe out there. This next one, it sounds dangerous. Mr. Salazar said to give you this. I'm not sure what to make of it, but he said that you should use it if your way does not work, and you're feeling desperate and outnumbered." I looked at the odd object with fascination and confusion. It was a small, ornate mirror, yet the glass, if indeed it was glass, was pitch black and offered no reflection. I pocketed it and looked back at Lucia. "Thank you for everything. I know I can't say much now, but I just want you to know." I stopped mid-sentence as we heard Mr. Salazar's footsteps coming toward the door. I gave Lucia a rueful smile and I rushed for the door. She returned it and gave a small wave before returning to her own work. I stepped outside and got to my car. I opened the collection note and knew this one was going to be bad. The item to be collected was cryptic as always. It read that I was to collect the borrowed time of the person. It was the individual that I was to collect it from that had me concerned. The target was a name that I actually recognized. James Chalmers, the CEO of ArcLight Industry, a defense contractor that had a lot of ties with the government. I was stunned and somewhat horrified that I had to collect something from an extremely powerful individual with no backup and only limited weapons. I thought for the first time that I was truly unprepared for my job. As my mind raced for a plan to achieve this insane goal, I saw a note on the collection this time. It was in the wiry and almost arcane-looking script of Mr. Salazar, and I had to strain my eyes to make out the eccentric handwriting. It read, "Henry, I will not lie, this is a dangerous one that I'm sending you on, but it is important. I have faith that if you are smart and capable, you will come back alive. In acknowledgement of this unique circumstance, I have some advice. To start, you must not drive there in your car. A modicum of discretion is needed if you do not wish to be implicated in a potential violent confrontation with a very powerful man. I took the liberty of arranging a different means of transportation for you. Please step out of your car and look one lot over." I did as the note instructed and looked over to the adjacent parking lot and saw that somehow my previous collection was parked near the street. The pride and joy of one Derek Willis sat there beckoning. I walked over to the audacious muscle car, which somehow looked even better than it did when I had driven it away from its prior owner. I had no idea how Salazar did what he did sometimes. It was unlocked and I saw the keys and another note resting on the dashboard. I unfolded it and read the new instructions. "The new transportation will make sense in a moment. Now I must note that we'll be dragging someone's name through the mud. Not yours, my friend. No, it'll be poor Mr. Willis once more. You see, he used to work for ArcLight Industry before his fortunes turned and he lost so much on his gambling. In fact, he had even met your current target, Mr. Chalmers, shortly before he was fired. For, well, let's just say for reasons that you would likely expect from him. Your cover here is very straightforward. I won't tell you exactly how to do your job, but I will say in order to keep you out of any untimely investigations that would keep a resource like you distracted from more important work like this, I have arranged a special workaround. Once you arrive at the company's main office downtown, you are to park Mr. Willis's car in a conspicuous area and then you are to open the trunk. Inside you will find a simple mask. Please put it on and do not give anybody your real name. As far as everyone should be considered, you are Derek Willis, a disgruntled ex-employee, and you are there to see Mr. Chalmers. One way or the other, I will leave the rest to you. P.S. Don't take off the mask. You will know why. Also, don't forget the box. You will need what is inside. I sat there for a moment digesting the insane plan Mr. Salazar had made for me. This was a whole new level. It was one thing to collect from some rando who lives in a trailer. It was something else entirely to go after a man who probably has an entire private army. I didn't know what I had gotten myself into, and at that moment I just wanted to leave. Just leave this insane job, this place, this state. Take Sarah and Lucia with me and just leave. I knew that it wouldn't work out like that though, and for the time being I was stuck. I hit the ignition of the fine car and it rumbled to life, and I drove it off towards my target with a feeling of uncertainty and anxiety that I had never felt before. I arrived downtown and traffic was surprisingly light. I parked in the lot reserved for employees and I opened the trunk. I looked inside and saw an odd expressionless mask staring back at me. The longer that I looked at it, the stranger I felt, and after several moments, I swear that I saw what looked like the shifting visage of Derek Willis looking back at me. There is no way, I muttered to myself, and I bent down to pick up the strange mask. Despite my apprehension, I didn't want to take any chances, and so I would follow Mr. Salazar's instructions. I took a breath and I placed the mask on my face. Nothing happened, and I wondered for a moment if the disguise really was just a mundane mask with no other latent effect. That thought vanished quickly as I felt an odd tightening around my face, and it felt very hot all of a sudden. I reached up to touch the mask and it felt like skin. I took out my phone and reversed the camera to look at myself, and I couldn't believe my eyes. My face, what stared back at me, was not my own, but it was Derek Willis's face, down to the last detail. This was indeed some disguise that Mr. Salazar had cooked up. Same face, same car. However this went down, everybody would only point the finger at one person, and he was not even here right now. I couldn't say that I felt bad considering what I knew about the guy, but I did feel remorse for what might happen to his kids if he went away completely, locked up or otherwise. I banished the thought and I pressed on. I had a job to do today, and just having a disguise would not make this any easier to accomplish it. It only covered my ass from any legal consequences if I survived and made it out of here. I left the parking lot and approached the large building with the towering sign indicating that I had arrived at ArcLight Industries, where no expense is spared for defense. I entered the lobby and decided to go for the long shot and ask for a meeting. I walked up to the desk of a friendly-looking receptionist, who according to her placard was named Vicky. She saw me approach and spoke first. "What can I do for you today, sir?" I smiled at her and responded, "Hello, I'm here to see Mr. Chalmers. My name is Derek Willis. I used to work here, and I was wondering if I could speak to him about a reference." Vicky looked at her computer and typed something quickly, and the friendly customer service smile slowly vanished from her face. She looked back up at me and suddenly looked nervous. "I'm sorry, Mr. Willis, it looks like you're not actually allowed to be on the premises anymore. Not only am I not able to arrange a meeting with Mr. Chalmers, but I'm afraid that I'll have to ask you to leave," she told me in a quivering voice. I wondered what the hell Derek had done to part on such apparently bad terms. Maybe he had made some threats or did something violent to get kicked out and banned from the building. As I was contemplating my next move, I could see that she was getting more and more anxious, and I saw her hand slowly reaching for something under the desk. I figured it might be some sort of security alarm that she was preparing to press in case I didn't leave. I hadn't seen any other points of ingress besides the front here, and I had little in the way of other options to get upstairs and see the man in charge, so I took a deep breath and I withdrew my Beretta. I held it close to my body but made a point to make it visible to Vicky, and I sternly whispered, "Don't do that. Take a step back from the desk and act naturally." She did as I told her, and she was looking around to try to see if anybody else in the lobby had noticed that she was at gunpoint right now. I lowered the barrel so that it was still directed at her but not visible to anybody else, and I told her, "Look, Vicky, I'm not here to hurt anyone, least of all you. You are just doing your job like me. But I am here to collect something from Mr. Chalmers that is owed, and I need to get upstairs to see him. If you help me with that, I can be out of here in a moment and nothing bad has to happen to anyone else. Can you help me with that?" She nodded gently, and I thought that I might be able to get there without issue. As I was about to ask her to send the elevator to the executive level downstairs for me, I heard another voice ring out. "Derek? What the hell are you doing here? You have a lot of nerve showing up here again, you piece of shit. Security, get this man out of here." I wheeled around to see a tall man in a well-tailored suit talking to me, or rather Derek. He suddenly put his hands up and he saw the muzzle of the Beretta, and I realized that things were going to get bad now. I heard an alarm trigger and saw Vicky raising her hands up and looking apologetically at me. "Oh, Vicky, why?" was all that I had time to say, before an explosion of motion occurred and armed guards were visible down the adjacent corridor. I ran forward and half grabbed, half tackled the random man who recognized Derek. I held the gun on him and demanded, "Key card, security card, whatever it is, give it here." The man panicked and handed me a lanyard with a security badge, and I took it from him, and he muttered a string of curses directed at Derek as I ran to the elevator. The elevator took its sweet time, and I knew the security team would be upon me soon. I had to hold them off, so I let loose a few shots directed at the ceiling near where they were, and they took cover near the reception desk without advancing any further. I made it into the elevator and was relieved to see that it hadn't been stopped by the security breach. I made it to the executive level near the top of the building, and as soon as I had stepped out, I was under fire. I dove for what little cover there was near the corner of the hall in the elevator. I saw several men with submachine guns down the corridor near the door to a fine-looking office. I knew that was likely where Chalmers was. I was going to get shot if I kept this up, and so I reached into my bag and pulled out the strange and dark mirror. I was certainly overwhelmed and outnumbered, though I had no idea how to use it, so I just gazed into the depths of the darkness in the mirror and saw an odd shifting pattern occur. There was no reflection prior, there was suddenly one and then two, and then several more versions of my reflection looking out at me. The effect was eerie and distracted me from the pinging sounds of bullets striking the decorations near where I was sheltering. I didn't know what to do next, but if something did not happen soon, then I was dead. Just when I was considering surrendering, I looked back toward the mirror and I saw something insane. There was a sound of breaking glass and the mirror's surface broke apart, and I had to do a double take as what looked like copies of me leaped out from the mirror. The doppelgangers proceeded to sprint down the corridor, and this elicited a new hailstorm of bullets directed at me. The storms of gunfire did nothing to slow their advance. In fact, nothing seemed to strike them at all. It was as if they were intangible. When they got closer to the men who had been shooting at me, they stopped, and the men panicked and shouted as they continued shooting at the strange copies to no effect. I stood up a bit more and I looked on. It was a good distraction, but I didn't know how it would help remove the threat of the armed guards. I found myself regretting the thought as I witnessed what happened next. I heard more shattering of glass and then screaming. The glass in the room, on the decorations, and on every surface in the room, and even the windows on the building shattered in unison and the room went dark. I saw flashing images of horrifying shapes in the darkness, and the panicked screaming and shooting of the guards, and then one by one they were silenced. The lights came back on about 30 seconds after the nightmarish scene, When it returned, all the men were gone. Their weapons lay on the floor and they were nowhere to be seen. I was confused when I poked my head out of cover and saw that they had all vanished. At that moment, I turned back and thought that I had heard a strangled scream come from behind me. I looked back and saw that the mirror was still on the ground there. I bent down to pick it up but dropped it again when as soon as I touched it, I saw the tortured face of a man with a suit and an earpiece screaming behind the glass. There were several more behind him, all screaming in a barely perceptible whisper. I didn't know what the hell I had just witnessed, but it turned out the men were not gone. They were trapped in the mirror somehow, and whatever those reflections had been were in there with them. I didn't want to know what would happen to them next, but I shuddered at the thought. I took a deep and steadying breath and tried to ignore the panicked cries for help and even more desperate pleas of, "Let us out, oh God, no, it's me. It has my face. Stay back." I covered the mirror with a small cloth and returned it to my bag. Mercifully, this drowned out the terrified cries, but I felt a chill go through my body when I sealed it. I had no idea how Mr. Salazar made these monstrous items, but this was the worst one yet. I knew that this was going to get violent, but I had not even wanted to shoot anyone. Now I had used some sort of hellish magic mirror and condemned those men to God knows what sort of fate. I tried to calm myself down and get back to the matter at hand. There were likely more guards on the way and I was never going to use that horrible item again. When this was over, I was really going to re-examine my career choices. This was not worth it. I walked down the blasted hallway towards Mr. Chalmers' office. The door was locked, unsurprisingly, and so I took out the skeleton key and, to my surprise, it didn't work at first. I wondered what was going on. I thought that it might be some sort of electronic lock, and then as I held the key, it seemed to flatten and then briefly took the form of an electronic keycard. I smiled as I heard the sound of the door unlocking. The door swung wide open and I dropped down and nearly missed a bullet to my head. I tried to recover and reached for my dropped firearm, but I saw James Chalmers standing behind his desk, holding a bulky pistol and aiming it down at me. He shook his head and spoke. "Don't be a fool, I have you. Make another move and my janitorial staff will have a tough time cleaning the contents of your head out of the marble flooring." I held up my hands and tried to slowly rise, which was difficult when I had almost fallen face first onto the admittedly nice floor. I had to think quick on how to fix this before something bad happened. I tried to get him talking. "James Chalmers, I presume. Pleasure to meet you. I've heard a lot about you." I saw his face contort in confusion. "We've met before, you psychotic idiot. I see firing you and banning you from this building was not enough to remove your particular brand of repellent obsession. No, you cannot have your old job back no matter how much you beg, and you certainly are not getting any more money from me or the company. Honestly, Derek, this is just sad." It was my turn to look confused, and then I remembered that to him I looked like Derek Willis. I didn't see enough of his memories to know the full extent of what had happened here, so there was not much to work with. I decided to keep stalling by telling him the truth. "You see, the thing is, Mr. Chalmers, I'm not here for money or a job. I was sent here by our mutual friend, Mr. Salazar. He says you owe him something besides money, and I'm here to take it back." His face twisted into a concerned grimace as he had heard the name, a common occurrence with all of his clients as I had seen so far. He paused for a moment considering the situation while I tried to slowly reach for the box in my coat. It isn't surprising that Salazar would resort to hiring a drag like you to get close to me. He has no more control over me. I will not play his stupid game anymore. I gave him what I believe he is owed and he will get nothing more. I'm going to send a message to him now about what happens if he tries to break into my company and send his cronies to collect from me. He is the past and I am the future. The hateful look on his face intensified and I had to act quickly. I shouted out, "Wait, I know that Salazar is crazy too. I am not that loyal to him. He acts like he's going to kill us every day if we do something wrong. I don't even know if he'll let me live after this job. If you work with me and don't kill me, I can show you how you can really be free from him." He gave me an important item that I was supposed to use in my talks with you. Some sort of bargaining chip. It's in the box in my coat. It's not a trick. I won't make a move. Just grab it and take a look. He said that it is related to your borrowed time. Mr. Chalmers' eyes lit up and he was clearly intrigued. He stepped closer and cocked the gun. Any funny business and I can still paint the floor with your brains. Stay still and don't even think about trying anything. I nodded my head and he reached down and removed the box from my coat. He held it in his hands and when he opened it, he smiled and I was relieved since it had bought me some time to figure out what I was going to do. He withdrew the item inside and I saw a strange little hourglass in his hands. I heard him chuckle and he looked back at me and laughed in my face. "You're such a perfect fool, aren't you, Derek? You have no idea what you were holding and what you could have possessed. I thank you for bringing it to me, but you are an even bigger fool if you think that I would let you live today after everything. This is honestly for the best. I get more time and you get to be free from Salazar, permanently. Salazar will think twice before trying to come to my doorstep and demand things from me." He aimed the gun down at me and I knew that he did not plan on letting me leave that place alive. I considered his words and how he had gotten more time. And then I remembered and I shouted out that I had one last thing to say. Mr. Chalmers humored me and indicated to get on with it. I pushed myself back up to my feet and looked him in the eyes. I grinned at him and said, "It's time." I saw a confused smile start to form on Mr. Chalmers' face, but it suddenly slowed and he appeared to be slowing down altogether, and then he suddenly just stopped. There was an odd shifting of the area around him and he appeared frozen by some unseen force. I saw his eyes slowly shifting to a look of confused terror. Whatever happened, he seemed utterly paralyzed. And then I saw his lips try to move in a slow motion, seemingly trying to voice some terror-induced plea. His mouth, though, could not move fast enough to form any coherent words. I saw the odd hourglass glowing and then a hazy aura of sickly colored light burst forth and enveloped him. I watched on in morbid fascination as the horror of the next few moments unfolded. I saw the field of energy tighten around his frame and I saw James Chalmers start to wither before my eyes. His eyes sunk in, his hair turned gray and then white, and his panic-stricken eyes took on a watery and detached look. His skin shrunk and shriveled and in a matter of 20 seconds, the horrifying display of temporal impossibility was over. James Chalmers was alive, but he looked like he was transformed from a man of about 40 to one of 140. He collapsed onto the floor and was barely able to pull himself along. He actually tried to grasp the heavy handgun and use it, but he was unable to lift its weight. I stood up and tried to process the shock and awe of what I had just seen. I bent down to retrieve the firearm from him just in case, and I also took the hourglass. It was hot to the touch and discomforting, almost electric aura surrounding it now. It had indeed taken something from James Chalmers. I heard him trying to speak to me, but the voice was a raspy whisper. I bent down and told him, "You need to get some medical assistance here. You don't look too great. You made a deal with the wrong person, Mr. Chalmers. You probably made a lot of money in this business, but you needed something that money couldn't buy. Time. Well, you got more time. I'm not sure what your deal was with him. I could find out if I wanted, but I really don't want to go digging around in your mind. I think that I wouldn't like what I found. You had to know though, right? You couldn't have been that arrogant. You always knew that you were on borrowed time. Well, that time is over now. It is time to give it back. I'm here to collect it, and I'm afraid to say that time is up for you, Mr. Chalmers. Take care and enjoy what remains of the time that you have." I heard a mumbled attempt at speaking, but he fell back down muttering incoherently. I realized that I would have to effect some sort of escape now. I heard a strange clicking sound, and to my surprise, a small section on the bottom of the hourglass opened up and a small folded note fell out. I read it and I was surprised to see that it was further instructions from Mr. Salazar, some sort of escape plan. If this opened, it means that you found the time to collect. You are likely sitting in a high-rise office waiting to be arrested or shot to death in a last-stand shootout, am I right? We'll erase your delusions of grandeur. None of that will be necessary today. I hope that you're not afraid of heights. It doesn't pay to be too proud to admit our fears. Just do me a favor and look out the east window and remember, pride cometh before the fall. I heard shouting outside of the room and I realized that more of the security detail were there. I had to act quickly, and so I locked the door and frantically scanned the room to see what Salazar might have done to help. Had he sent a helicopter or some sort of escape vehicle? I was annoyed that even in a case of life or death that he somehow predicted, Salazar still had to be cryptic about what I needed to do. Having no other choice, I looked out the east window and couldn't believe what I saw. On the roof of an adjacent building was the car, the Pride and Joy. The car had somehow been parked on the roof of the building, and I heard a loud sound like a wire going tense. I saw that there was a cable of some sort that had been launched from the other building, and up at an angle to create a decline that was about the same angle as your average zip line. I chuckled to myself despite the danger of the situation and the sound of a ram being brought up to smash the door in. The Pride was right there and it made it here before the fall down the zip line. I hated that creepy guy, but I couldn't deny his unfortunately brilliant timing. Just as the door was breached, I unbuckled my belt and threw it over the line and proceeded to zoom down at a frightening speed. I reached the other building but saw that the car was only an anchor point. It kept leading down and down. I hurtled through the sky on an entire series of gradually descending cables that led me down several stories and eventually to the ground several blocks away from the building. I couldn't believe that I had gotten out of there. I beat a hasty retreat, and when I got to the bus stop and got out of downtown, I started to relax. I sat there panting and exhausted but still alive. I mulled over the insane events as I made my way back to the office. Once I got back, I finally removed the bizarre mask of Derek Willis and went to head inside with the insane prize. I thought of Mr. Chalmers and the terrible price that he had paid for this collection. I thought about my own life and all the things that I knew I should do but never committed to. I thought of Sarah, of Lucia, and even my ex and all the people that I could and should have spent my time with. The more I thought about it, the more I started to understand how somebody would make such a deal and pay almost any price for something so precious. There really was never enough time. I sighed and stepped inside. I walked inside and no one seemed to be around. It was odd that the store was open, but Lucia was not at the front desk. When I moved to check the back room, I saw that Mr. Salazar was missing as well. I checked my phone and I didn't have any notifications from either of them. I was about to leave when I decided to check Mr. Salazar's desk, and I saw a note on it facing toward the door. I picked it up and it read, "Henry, change of plans. I have to leave for a few weeks for some urgent matters out of state. Please deposit the borrowed time in the lockbox next to my desk and just hold down the fort with Lucia. I'll be back as soon as I'm able to. But in the meantime, if any of my clients come in, please take detailed notes and information on their request so that I may fulfill them when I return. You are not to retrieve anything for anyone, make any deals, or otherwise do anything besides get information and let them know that I'll take care of them when I return. You two don't get into any trouble and do not under any circumstance let anyone or anything into my office or vault, or there will be consequences. E. Salazar." It seemed like Mr. Salazar was taking an impromptu vacation. I thought it was strange that the place was left unattended though. He didn't mention Lucia going anywhere. I decided to call her, but there was no answer. I left a message and was beginning to get concerned. I left the eerie back room after taking a moment's pause. I considered looking at the array of relics and items that Mr. Salazar kept hidden away from the normal purveyors. I thought better of it when I recalled how much just one of these things could do if misused or not fully understood, and I banished the thought and left the office. I looked for the extra store key and locked up and started to the exit. I didn't know how often we were meant to hold down the fort, but I needed a break and decided to head for home. I figured that I should lock up to prevent any of the arcane objects from becoming victims of petty theft by any opportunistic thieves who might see a shiny bauble, only for it to implode on them or somebody that they pointed it at. I hope the thought was an exaggeration, but having used some of these terrible items, I thought it might not be that far off. I remembered the mirror and I shuddered. I went home, and for the rest of that night, it was pretty uneventful. The next day was in essence a day off. No word from Mr. Salazar and still no word from Lucia. I was getting more and more worried about her, but eventually that evening I got a call. She said that she was safe and that she had needed to take care of some family things, and that she would tell me more about it tomorrow. Lucia arrived at my place in the early morning, and we had discussed the odd departure from Mr. Salazar. Neither of us had expected him to just leave like he did, but we still went into the office and watched the place. No customers came in, and it was basically the two of us waiting around and spending time together. Despite not getting any more collection gigs, I found myself enjoying just getting to spend time with Lucy at work, without Mr. Salazar there breathing down our necks. We kept up the routine for the entire time that he was away. Hang out in the office, close up, and then go grab dinner, and then sometimes head back to one of our places for some fun afterwards. Even though we were still technically working, the whole time felt like a vacation from a lot of our problems. At least that's how I felt. Lucia had to take some of that time off, and she grew more concerned as the days went on. Something was troubling her, but whenever I asked, she would assure me everything was fine. The night before Mr. Salazar was set to return, Lucia received a phone call shortly after she had arrived. I was sitting behind the counter looking something up on my phone, and I hadn't even had a chance to say hello when I thought that I heard a muffled cry. She hung up the phone, and I heard her crying softly to herself. I decided to try and talk to her about it. "Oh, Lou, what's wrong? What happened? Are you okay?" She looked up at me as if in a haze and then responded, "Oh, I'm sorry, is it that obvious? Well, I just got some really bad news today. It's my sister. She hasn't been doing well and I'm worried. She's been very sick, and part of why I've been gone so much is that I've been taking care of her and taking her to the doctor to try and see what's wrong. She has had a variety of concerning symptoms, and we thought that it might be some underlying condition. And well, we were right, but..." She trailed off and started to cry again. Whatever it was serious, and my heart ached, seeing her break down like this and being unable to help. She held my hand and continued, "I'm sorry, I'm still trying to process it. My sister, she has a brain tumor. The doctors didn't find it in the original exams, and it has progressed to the point where it's very likely inoperable. They think she won't have much longer. She's only 9 years old and she's already out of time." She couldn't continue, and she fell into my arms and was weeping openly, for likely the first time that day. I stood there just holding her for a while. I knew she was truly processing how sad and hopeless she felt, knowing that her sister was going to die. I couldn't think of anything to say. All I could manage was to repeat the words, "I'm so sorry." After a few minutes, the moment was broken by the sudden disturbance of the door opening. Lucia pushed away from me and wiped her eyes and tried to compose herself, and I walked toward the front door to see who was coming in. I was wondering if Mr. Salazar was back a bit early. To both of our surprise, it was not Mr. Salazar. It was a towering man in a dark suit with sunglasses and an earpiece. He was incredibly muscular, and he had a firearm not so conspicuously tucked into his suit pocket. He uttered a few words that I couldn't hear into a radio and moved in. He held the door for another man who was pushing a wheelchair into the store. In the wheelchair sat an ancient and haggard-looking individual in a brilliant white suit. He was connected to a small hospital's worth of oxygen, IV fluids, and an apparatus. The guy looked like he was on the cusp of death. The old man was pushed in reverently by the smaller man, and it appeared that they were some sort of assistants or security detail for him. After looking around, the giant in the black suit saw me and stepped forward. He looked me up and down and said, "Mr. Salazar, I presume." I looked at the odd group and was confused, but I realized they might be some of Salazar's clients. I responded to the man's assertion. "No, the name's Henry. I am an associate of Mr. Salazar and I'm watching the business while he's away. Mr. Salazar is set to return tomorrow. We are here to assist with any client requests. However, no exchanges or deals will be brokered until Mr. Salazar is back." I thought that I had nailed the intent of Salazar's message, since he had indicated that no actual business was to be done in his absence. The huge man loomed over me and sneered, and then he spoke again. "Mr. Beckett came a long way to see Mr. Salazar. He does not travel well, as you can imagine. We do not exactly have time to waste. In fact, that was what Mr. Salazar had promised, more time. You are telling me that we came here for nothing. Mr. Beckett does not like to waste his time. Surely he must have told you that we were coming. You must have the time that we came for. Just give it to us and we'll be on our way." He continued staring me down and held his hands together and cracked his knuckles. I saw his gigantic arms coil with barely restrained fury, and it was not hard to tell this was some sort of power play to intimidate us into giving them what they came for without whatever insane contract that Salazar would normally write up. I didn't care much for Mr. Salazar's business reputation, but I disliked being intimidated and screwed around with even less. So in this case, I would stick up for his business more for personal pride than brand loyalty. I saw Lucia out of the corner of my eye and she had a concerned but ready look. Like if things escalated to violence, she would be right in the thick of it too. I didn't want it to come to that. I looked back at the giant of a man and decided to play it a bit dumb so that I could get an idea of what they wanted the time as it was. I figured they meant the borrowed time that I had successfully collected and brought back. Yet I did not know what sort of deal Mr. Salazar had made to give it to somebody else already. "Ah, yes, I see. Well, if your client needs time, then I have what I think you need right here." I went behind the counter and grabbed an old pocket watch and gave it to the man. He looked at it and snarled. "It's not a pocket watch. It's an hourglass, and I think that you know that. Salazar said it was an hourglass and it would make Mr. Beckett better, that it would give him more time. We have come a long way for that hourglass. Bring it here now or I can go and get it. We are not waiting anymore." He took a step towards me and I knew that things were about to escalate. It seemed like no was not going to be an option without a show of force. Fortunately, I had anticipated the move by the big man, and while he was inspecting the watch, I had been able to shift my Beretta along my holster and right to the edge of the hand without being noticed. The gun was now laying right at my side and my hand tensed on the grip in expectation. As the big man moved toward me, I had the weapon raised in an instant. I was aiming not at him but at the man in the wheelchair. I heard an imperceptible gasp or gargle for air from the man in the chair, and both of the other men backed away and held up their arms. The smaller man behind the chair dropping a firearm in the process. I had guessed right. The guards were replaceable, but the man in charge wouldn't risk his own life. I put on my best sarcastic customer service voice and told them again, "Mr. Salazar is away at the time. He will return tomorrow, and if you had to deal with him, you may return then. Whatever item you were to pick up or promise that you made with him is still here and still binding. But that business is between you and him. We are only authorized to take notes and information on clients who stop by. No deals until he returns. Is that clear enough for you, or do we need to start shooting each other? You guys may be tough, but I guarantee that before you could kill me, I could decorate the walls in your geriatric boss's ancient brains. So not to put too fine a point on it, but I will say it once again that we are not open for business yet." I saw the hateful looks of the guards and the withered man in the chair. He could not speak well, but he heard the threat, and his old face took on a disturbing and furious countenance. The large guard lowered his hands, huffed, and then flatly stated, "Fine, we will go, but Salazar will be hearing about this tomorrow when we return." They turned and left, and when the large man closed the door, he slammed it and knocked several things off the nearby shelf with the petty act of aggression. I looked to Lucia, who let out a sigh of relief, and I shrugged my shoulders. "What a prick," I said with a laugh to try and diffuse the tension. Lucia got out a notepad and started writing. She asked me, "What were they after again? Something about time." I figured that I should make a note about the visit for Mr. Salazar. I told her about the borrowed time and how I suspected that that was what they had wanted. I mentioned the details of my previous job and about the unnatural life it gave to Mr. Chalmers. I wasn't surprised that some other sick but powerful man would give anything to extend his horrible life. I figured Mr. Beckett, as the large man had said his name was likely some sort of powerful CEO, a mob boss, or something worse. Most likely some type of position of power where you are shocked when somebody gives resistance and violence or money doesn't solve all your problems. I found myself wishing that Mr. Salazar would be a bit more discerning and would not give such potent items to such awful people. Prolonging their lives can't be worth whatever Salazar gets in return. Though my skin crawled when I considered just what Salazar asked for in exchange. I didn't want to know, but for something like that, it had to be significant indeed. After the ordeal was over and we were set to leave and lock up, I checked in with Lucia to see if she was okay. I asked her if she wanted to come home with me so that she wouldn't have to be alone after the terrible day that she had. To my surprise, she declined and said that she still had to take care of some things here before Mr. Salazar returned. She said that she appreciated the offer but didn't want to get in trouble if the paperwork was not filed correctly. I reached out to hold her hand and assured her that everything would be all right and that we could handle anything together. She said nothing though, just smiled in such a sad way. It seemed odd, but it was like a new sort of loss or pain was hidden behind her eyes. Yet, she could not bring herself to tell me exactly what it was. She was going through a tough time and I wanted to be there with her. But I had to respect her wishes, so I did not press the subject and I left. The next day I woke up late. My alarm hadn't gone off for some reason. I saw that I had several missed calls from Mr. Salazar. There were no messages, but when I called back to explain, it didn't go through, and I just got a busy signal. Something was wrong. I called Lucia and she didn't answer either. I had to see what was going on, and so I drove to the office as quickly as I could. I arrived in a good time and I went inside. I looked around for Lucia but couldn't find her. The place was unlocked, but she was nowhere to be seen. I stepped further into the building and I called out, "Lucia, where are you?" No response. I decided to check the back when I heard an ominous voice ring out. "Henry, if that is you, come here right now." It was Mr. Salazar and he sounded furious about something. I swallowed hard and slowly walked to the back. I stepped into Mr. Salazar's office and the place was a wreck. Glass was shattered on the ground and strange colored liquids bled into the corners of the antique cabinets. They smelled bad and I thought that they might be some sort of hazardous chemicals or maybe bizarre poisons. I looked down and saw that one of the cabinets had even been turned over. I was shocked at the destruction but was horrified by the deranged and berserk face on Mr. Salazar. His face was red with rage and he was panting from some violent exertion. He barely slowed his labored into furious breathing to regard me, and then he spoke in a way that was paradoxically calm, but seething with anger at the same time. "Henry, I'm only going to ask you this once. Where is the borrowed time?" I looked back in confusion and disbelief. I told him honestly, "I stored it where you instructed. It should be in the secure case right by your desk." I tried to hide my mounting fear at the situation. I had never seen Mr. Salazar so furious before. I was never afraid of a physical confrontation with him, but I knew the items that he possessed and knew that if he wanted to hurt me, he could. It didn't matter how good of a fighter I thought I was and how weak he might look. I knew if I really made him mad and if I crossed him, I would be dead. He looked me up and down and pinched the bridge of his nose and closed his eyes in what almost seemed like an exacerbated sigh. And then he spoke again, and I thought that I might be knocked off my feet by the sudden bellow. "Well, it's not there. I looked there already and it's not there." I tried to remain standing, but I felt weak in my knees. I knew that I had put it there. I wondered if those men had stolen it last night or something. As I considered my next words, Salazar cut me off and demanded, "And where in the hell is Lucia? Why is she not here? What happened?" I stammered for a response. I don't know. I don't know what happened. We were here last night when a client came by. We took notes on a request. They said they wanted the time. Maybe they stole it." Mr. Salazar's face contorted into a snarl and he held out his hand and said, "I want to believe you, Henry, but I don't. Tuner, now. Stand here and don't resist." My heart sank. I hated using the thing. It was even worse surrendering your mind to somebody else using it, especially if that someone was Salazar. I reluctantly pulled out the device and he activated it, and I fell out of tangible consciousness. I tried to guard some memories from my mind and just focused on what happened last night, and I almost succeeded. But then I thought of Lucia and I remembered holding her while she cried for her sister. And then to my horror, I realized that Salazar would know about us now. I clutched my head in pain and saw that Mr. Salazar was putting the device away and showing no sign of discomfort somehow. He looked me up and down and grabbed the back of my shirt and hoisted me up by the collar with a surprising strength. I was woozy and it felt like my brain had been cut open. Mr. Salazar's eyes still flamed with barely contained anger and he shouted at me, "Get up, Henry. I am disappointed in you, but you can make this better. Indeed, you are going to, or else I will have to take out the rest of my frustration on you. I have a job for you and you're going to have to recollect the borrowed time. Clearly it has been stolen. I saw your memories and I know you spoke the truth when you said that you put it into the storage container. So I hope that I can trust that you will think this through and not try and lie to me when you are going to carry out the next task and find the stolen property. It is critically important, and if Mr. Beckett dies before receiving it, well, let's just say that I will lose some leverage with some powerful people that I will not be able to get back. If that happens, I will have to punish those responsible for losing it, and that includes you." He quickly wrote down a collection note and shoved it into my hands. His eyes narrowed and he spoke in a way that was slightly calmer but significantly more menacing. "There are 2 things to collect this time. Return with both before the end of the day or I'll have to assume that you failed and I will take measures that I have deemed appropriate. Leave now." I nearly tripped over my own feet and turned and left. I stepped outside and I looked around once more. Lucia still hadn't shown up. I hoped that she was okay. I wondered if Salazar would try to blame her as well or threaten her over this borrowed time thing. It did not seem fair. We hadn't done anything. It must have been those clients from last night. I checked my phone again and still nothing. I sighed and got in my car, trying to compose myself. I checked my bag to make sure that I would be going in with some weapons. That big guy was no joke and I didn't want to get into a fight with him. I would likely be snapped in half. I wondered if I would have to travel and suspected that they might have gone back home with their stolen prize, wherever that was. And then I finally looked at the collection note to see the details of who I was dealing with. I sat there, mouth agape and the blood freezing in my veins. It couldn't be. I read these specifics in mounting horror. Items to be collected are the borrowed time and the heart of a thief. The target is Miss Lucia Ramirez. The collection is due within the next 24 hours. I gripped the paper in a cold sweat. This couldn't be happening. I sank into my seat, hanging my head in confusion and despair. How was this happening? Salazar thought that Lucia took the time, but why? I looked up and saw a follow-up note from Salazar near the bottom of the paper saying, "Good intentions will not save you from consequences. No matter her reason, this theft will not be tolerated. Fail to collect and you will be held responsible, Henry. Think of your family before deciding to do anything stupid. E. Salazar. I couldn't believe that this was happening. I would have to hunt down Lucia, or Salazar was going to hurt my family. I had no idea what to do. Why would she have stolen from him in the first place? And then it came to me. Her sister. She heard what the borrowed time could do, and that must have been it. She took it to save her. That is the only reason she would do something so reckless. That was why she looked so sad, so defeated last night when she said goodbye. She had no intention of ever seeing me again. She had probably left with her sister somewhere already. I had to find her before it was too late. I had no idea what to do when I got there, but I had to think of something. Time was running out. I drove on in a blind panic. I knew that it was likely useless, but I decided to go to Lucia's place first and see what I could find. When I got there, I saw that her car was gone and the lights were turned off. I discreetly walked up and tried the door, and it was unlocked. Stepping inside, I saw everything was in a state of turmoil. Half-filled boxes lay scattered around, and no one room was fully packed up and moved. They were rushed, of course. She hadn't planned ahead on this, and she was just desperate enough to try to do this now when she felt like her sister had no hope of recovery on her own. I let out a dejected sigh and checked my phone again, hoping that she had replied to any of my messages. I was scared for her and myself. I knew why she was doing it. Hell, if something was wrong with Sarah, I would have done it too. I just wished that she had just told me. Now we were in a situation where Salazar wanted her dead and I was the trigger man. I knew that was why she would not respond. She couldn't. It was not safe. I was not safe. I remembered how I let slip the details about our relationship to the mental probing of Mr. Salazar, and I felt guilty and hopeless. She had probably figured that Salazar would leverage my own family against my loyalty to her. I was being forced to find her, and I didn't honestly know what I would do if or when I did. I started combing through what remained and tried to look for some clue or hint as to where she might be going. After several minutes of searching, I was not finding anything useful. I almost left without anything, but something had caught my eye. I saw passport application papers, not for her but for her sister Carla. It made sense. Wherever they were going, it was out of the country. I didn't know if they could get far enough away anywhere in the world to be safe from Mr. Salazar. I continued looking and found a small computer and a printer in her office. They must have been too large to take with her. The devices were still turned on, and I tried to see if anything useful was present. No trace was left on screen, no obvious clues. She was too clever to leave a window up with detailed plans of their escape. I thought that I would try something less obvious. I reached into the toolkit and pulled out a rolled-up sheet of paper that was kept in a strange tin. I had never tried this trinket before, but Salazar said that it was good at finding a paper trail if you use it right. I had a hunch and decided to place the paper in the tray of the printer, and I pushed print. Nothing was in the queue and nothing happened for a few moments. And then the printer came to life, and when it was finished, I saw that it had all of the details of the last thing that had been printed on it. Sure enough, I saw a receipt and ticket information. 2 plane tickets to Tijuana. I had a destination, but the date for departure was tomorrow. I didn't have that long. Salazar said that I had a day to find them. I left with the information that I had and resolved to check the hotels near the airport and hope that she was at one of them. I wrote the names of all the hotels and motels closest to the airport on a small list. I just had to hope that she had picked one of those and not someplace further away or lower key. Time was running out fast, and it was the only information that I had to go on. To my dismay, there were dozens to check, but I had no other clues to go on. I got in my car and I left in a hurry, speeding out of there and towards the first place on the list. I was fortunate that she had taken her car. I thought it would be easier to check the parking lots of the hotels first, rather than wasting time trying to check registries and having to deal with staff if I didn't have to. After arriving near the airport and checking a few hotels and motels, I was lucky, and when I got to the 4th place on the list, I saw her car parked at the Motel 6 in the area. I had to approach this delicately. It was just her and her sister, scared and on the run. I did not know if she believed that I would try and hurt her. I had no intention of doing that, but would she still trust me? I didn't bring my weapons, just my backpack with the skeleton key in case I needed to get in. I just needed to talk to her and explain the situation. It was dangerous. I didn't know if she felt the same way that I did. I knew that she would put her life and the life of her sister above me, her ex-coworker and fling for the short while that we were together. Honestly, who could blame her, but I wanted her to see that I meant no harm, to see that I still trusted her to do the right thing and that maybe she would still trust me. We could figure this out, I just needed to talk to her. I had determined which room they were in when I caught a peek of a familiar shape discreetly leaving and coming back a few minutes later. I walked up to the door and decided to just lay it on the line. I knocked on the door several times and held my hands up and whispered just loud enough to be heard through the door. "Lucia, we need to talk." There was a long pause and I heard shuffling inside and a door closing. Maybe her sister locking herself in the bathroom, I thought. Suddenly, the door swung open and Lucia was standing there, half undressed and holding a gun on me. She looked scared and angry in equal measure. She spoke in a soft hiss. "Henry, what the hell are you doing here? I knew Salazar would send you after us. You don't get it. There is no nice way that this will play out. Whatever your plan is, it won't work. We need to leave and get as far away as we can from him. I can't go back, I won't." Her voice started wavering and she looked strangely hopeful for a moment and continued. "Henry, we can't go back now. It worked, the time. Somehow it just worked. My sister, she isn't sick anymore. I don't know how, but it just worked and I'm not giving it back to him. I won't let her die so that some rich creep gets to live with the years that belong to somebody innocent like her." I saw her eyes welling with tears and I didn't know what I could do or say just then to even make a case. I was disarmed literally and mentally. All I could do was tell her the truth. "Lou, he threatened Sarah. I have a day to get the borrowed time back to him or I don't know what he'll try to do. What's worse is I don't know if I can stop him." My own voice started to give out and I just stood there, looking at her with a mix of desperation, conviction, and hopelessness. I didn't know what I expected her to say. Would she sacrifice her sister for my daughter? I did not imagine that anybody would in her shoes. She looked back at me with a pained and sorrowful expression. A moment later, she lowered the gun, stepped forward, and embraced me. I hugged her back and we stood there for a while. We were both confused and desperate, but at least in that moment, we were together. She took a step back and grabbed my hand and said, "Come with us. Take Sarah and convince Nancy to go. We can all leave, we just need to get out of here. Somewhere far away that Salazar can't reach us." I saw the hopeful look on her face, but knew that even she didn't really believe that it would work. Yet I considered our options and started to see a glimmer of hope in that desperate choice. After a moment, I nodded my head and told her, "I'll go get Sarah. Nancy will have to understand. We don't have much choice in this. We can make this work." Lucia embraced me again, and before she could say anything else, we heard an awful static squelch coming from my backpack, followed by a familiar voice. "A shame, Henry. I thought that you were smarter than this, casting your lot in with a thief. And you, Miss Ramirez, I expected much better from you. My trust is a sacred bond, a contract that I made with you to help keep my secrets. You have broken that contract. Now you owe me something more, and what is owed has come due. You have both made your choices, and now I have made mine. No one steals from my collection, no one betrays my trust, and no one breaks a contract with me." We were both shocked and horrified as we heard Mr. Salazar's voice coming from my backpack. I should have never brought it in. I can't believe that I was so stupid and never thought that he might be tracking me, making sure that I played the role of collector like always. I knew that we had to do something fast. I had no idea what was going to happen to us. The pack kept talking and a vicious inflection flared up in the static-laden voice of Mr. Salazar as he continued. "Fortunately, I had a contingency in case you failed to act, Henry. You will see it soon, Lucia. As for you, Henry, you're fired." We stood in stunned silence as the voice cut off, and before I could take another breath, the backpack suddenly burst into a fireball. The instant conflagration had set me on fire, and I tried to throw the pack off as the flames seared my skin. I fell to the ground, desperately rolling as I burned. Lucia was screaming, and I dimly heard her shout to her sister to get water from the bathroom. The rolling was not putting the fire out, and I felt the agony of the flames tearing at my skin. I had one last stupid idea to try and extinguish myself. I saw the outdoor pool downstairs when I came in, and it wasn't too far of a drop. I forced myself to my feet and threw myself off the railing and plummeted down into the pool below. I sank like a rock in the water and struck the ground from the force of the fall. Fortunately, I had not hit my head, and I managed to swim back up to the surface. Every ounce of my body was in pain. My lungs still felt like they were on fire, but I was alive. I heard Lucia shouting something from upstairs, but I couldn't make it out as I bobbled in the water like a dead fish, trying to regain enough strength to swim out of there. I almost passed out in the water, but I managed to slowly float to the edge. Lucia made it down to the pool, and she helped me get out. I finally regained a bit of composure from almost being burned alive and then drowning. I saw her looking down at me and almost smiled. But then we both heard something that froze our hearts. It was a child's scream. I forced myself painfully up to my feet. Lucia was already bolting back towards these stairs, shouting, "Carla, no! Get back inside and lock the doors." But it was too late. I saw armed men gathering near the door to their room. Several gunshots rang out, and I saw Lucia firing at them. Her aim was good, and one of them crumpled to the ground. A return fire rang out, and I saw Lucia taking cover by the stairs leading up to their room. In the next moment, a large man exited the hotel room, and he had his arm wrapped around Carla's neck and a gun pointed at her head. To my horror, I recognized this large man now holding her hostage. It was the personal bodyguard who had come into the store with Mr. Beckett the day before. I did not know how or why he was here. I thought that Salazar had sent people after us, but this seemed odd. The large man spoke in an eerily calm voice, making his demand. "Surrender. We have your sister, Miss Ramirez, and now you will give us the hourglass, or you will force me to take more direct action to ensure your compliance." He made sure that she could see the gun that he was holding to Carla's head, and Lucia screamed back at him, "If you hurt her, you're a dead man." I watched on from downstairs, trying to figure out what I could do. I saw the hotel manager had emerged from the office, and he saw the guns drawn. I tried to warn him to get down, but he stood there dumbly for a moment, and then he promptly grabbed his phone to try and call the police. One of the men had seen him, and without hesitation, he shot him down in cold blood. Their leader spoke again. "No one interferes. We are here for one thing. Give it to us and we will leave." I had an idea just then. I stood up and shouted, "Wait, we will give you the hourglass. Just let the girl go." The group of men looked down at where they heard the voice and saw me standing there with my arms up. The big man had recognized me and smugly stated, "Finally someone that can see reason. I knew the collector's errand boy would recognize a fight that he couldn't win." I looked over to catch a glimpse at Lucia, who looked confused, and then while looking directly at her, I shouted, "Just give them the hourglass and they will let Carla go." I saw recognition in her eyes, and she was on board with the gambit. These were Beckett's men, and they didn't know that the borrowed time had already been used, and that the hourglass was empty now. Whatever bizarre energy it had contained was currently sustaining the life of Lucia's sister. Lucia raised her hands up, and I went to join her. We slowly walked up the stairs, and the guards had their weapons trained on us. Lucia stared daggers at the big man and told him, "The hourglass is inside. It's in the red suitcase. Now let her go." The man chuckled, and he motioned for one of his cronies to go in and verify. He emerged a moment later holding the ornate hourglass. He handed it to the boss, and the big man rolled it over in his hands. He looked back at us and then grunted and let his grip on Carla loosen enough for the little girl to escape and run toward Lucia. He looked back at us and said, "Well, a deal is a deal. Mr. Beckett will be thrilled. We didn't even need to deal with that weird old man Salazar. No, not when we ended up getting a better deal from his associates. That's right, the hourglass for letting the girl go. A deal is a deal." We were about to turn and walk away when he spoke again. "But some deals leave loose ends." I did not say anything about tidying up loose ends. We don't want Salazar sniffing around. As far as he knows, you lot still have it. It would sure be convenient if you all died and his borrowed time had vanished. It seems like if we let you go, you might be forced to tell him who had it. So, loose ends. He nodded to his men and he turned and started walking away down the opposite staircase. The men pointed their weapons at us and I thought that we were dead. Lucia was holding her sister and she was crying. I didn't know what I could do. Suddenly I heard a muffled click and the telltale sound of a subsonic crack cutting through the air. The two men aiming their weapons at us had small holes in their heads that jetted blood out onto the cheap patio railing. I screamed at Lucia to get down, but to my horror, I saw that she was already laying on the ground, a bleeding wound now blossoming on her shoulder where she had been shot as well. She had covered Carla with her body and the poor girl was still screaming, even as Lucia slowly tried to drag them both out of the line of fire. I dove toward the slain men as I heard more muffled shots rake the stairwell, aiming for the large man now evidently. Somehow he evaded them and I heard angry cursing as the big man tried to return fire to wherever the shooter was located. Whoever it was, they were not on his side or ours. I grabbed the submachine gun that the dead guard had been carrying and I shoved both bodies together to create some makeshift cover out of their bodies. I heard gunfire from the stairwell and more cursing. While the unknown assailant was firing at the other man, I crawled over to Lucia and I tried to help her move. I managed to grab a hold of her and she held onto her sister as we crawled on and through the door to the room. We just made it inside when a large arm seized the door right as I tried to close it. The door was thrown open and I saw Beckett's man. He was wounded but still alive and he charged forward, knocking me off my feet. I dropped the submachine gun that I had recovered and it fell from my hands and outside the room, right where the patio was being raked with gunfire. I took a step back but saw that the big man had lost his gun as well. He took a step inside and closed the door behind him, the sound of gunfire pinging off the nearby walls. He glared at us and shouted, "Call off your man or I swear that I'll break your necks before he can save you." I stood up promptly and got in between the deranged man and Lucia and her sister. I gestured down to Lucia and I told him, "Open your eyes, he shot at us too. Whoever that is, he's not with us and you might want to get down." I ducked and the door was perforated with several more precise shots. The large man fell to his side and landed hard, breaking a nearby coffee table. I looked down at him and said, "If we want to get out of this, we'll have to work together. We wait for him to come to us and he'll likely try to get in. He knows that we're in here and that someone might have alerted the police and should be arriving to help at some point. He'll have to make a move." The large man winced at the mention of police but relented and shrugged his shoulders and spoke. "All right, little collector, we'll do it your way. Just understand that I'm keeping the hourglass whatever happens. Now, what should we do when he gets here?" I looked over to Lucia and told her to get back and take Carla in the bathroom and lock the door. She nodded her head and started to respond, but I held up my hand as I heard a gentle creaking and the front door began to open. Next was a small clinking sound and I saw a curious little red orb on the ground. It looked strangely familiar and when I remembered where I had seen them before my heart sank, I shouted out, "No time!" And I kicked Beckett's guard in the back of his knee and he fell forward onto his face and on top of the red orb. I dove toward the bathroom where Lucia and Carla had moved to. I landed hard and I heard a loud vacuum-like sound behind me. I looked back and I was shocked by the sight. Before our eyes, the man had simply imploded on himself. A shriveled sack of blood was all that was left of his hulking frame. I spared the time to chuckle morbidly at the fate of Beckett's right-hand man and how even though he didn't steal directly from Salazar's business, the same thing had happened to him. I guess there really was one that would implode a person. When I considered the weapon that had been deployed, I realized the gravity of the danger that we were still in. Only one person would have those sorts of tools. Salazar had sent someone after us. I was terrified of what else they might have brought. Either tools that I knew about or horrifying new ones. Before I could rise to my feet, a slender figure emerged through the doorway. They wore a strange mask and carried a large pistol and a strange-looking knife. I heard a distorted voice call out, "You must be Henry. I heard a lot about you. It's a pleasure to meet you. You did some good work from what I heard. I guess I'm your replacement. The name's Gideon. So I won't insult your intelligence by entertaining any other notions about what is going to happen here. The secretary's got to die, man, you know that. But Salazar said that he would be willing to spare you and your kid if you cooperate, and you don't get in the way. There's still a chance to turn back, just to walk away and let me handle this." I slowly stood up and I looked at the man. I had to think or something, but I needed time. I tried to get him talking. "Why kill Beckett's men? They were about to do your job for you." The man, Gideon, as he said his name was, chuckled and cocked his head slightly in what was likely a bemused expression under his mask and responded, "Yeah, that would have been awesome, but Beckett and his guys did not have the full picture. The hourglass is useless when that kiddo has the time. Pretty sure we have to put it back in the hourglass. Couldn't have him shooting her. I don't think that stuff makes you bulletproof, and I didn't want to risk losing it. Plus, Beckett tried to cheat Mr. Salazar. They had a deal beforehand and he tried to cut us out. I didn't even know that they would be here, but once Salazar finds out, he might have to add some extra strings to the contract if that dinosaur Beckett still wants his time after trying to screw us." I nodded my head and tried to keep him talking, but he cut me off and stated plainly, "No time for chit-chat. What's it gonna be, Henry? I really gotta go and I don't want to have to start killing cops, but I mean, you have seen this sort of crazy stuff he gives us. If I have to, I have to. It's just easier to keep a low profile, you know." I made my decision. I looked back to Lucia and took a step forward with my hands up. I walked toward Gideon and stood next to him with my arms still up and I responded, "If it'll save my daughter, I have no choice." I saw the color drain from Lucia's face and Carla started crying again. The pain of betrayal on her face was unbearable and for a moment, I thought that I wouldn't be able to hold my composure. And Gideon chuckled and said, "Good choice, man. I knew you were the real deal. No need to die for some worker bee. Not when ladies like her are a dime a dozen when you get the kind of cash you get from this gig. Anyway, time to say goodnight, little lady. Nothing personal." He aimed the gun at Lucia and I shouted out, "Wait, I have one last thing to say to her, please." He held the gun up and Lucia glared at me, obviously not wanting to hear a word out of me. I crossed my fingers and hoped that this would work. I spoke again and I uttered a single word. "Evernight." In an instant, all the light in the room was sucked into Gideon's bag and the room went pitch black. I only had a few moments and I hoped that he wouldn't fire a shot while still aiming at Lucia and her sister. I shifted my weight forward and executed a hard-pushing kick. It struck home and I heard Gideon cry out in pain and confusion. The unnatural darkness swallowed the flash of the firearm, but I heard the reports of several shots ringing out. I heard a clatter on the floor and I tried to follow the sound as best I could. I felt the nearby armchair and I jumped onto it. There were more shots and I swear that I felt one graze past my foot. I followed the sound and leaped off the chair and fell down, leading with my arm in a makeshift elbow drop on his hopefully still prone form. I heard another cry of pain as my elbow connected with what felt like his sternum. I tried to reach up and grab for his arms, which might still be holding his weapons. It was my turn to cry out as I felt the bite of the knife digging into my side. I painfully pulled free and I dropped to my back to avoid what I guessed were several follow-up stabs directed at where I had been. I had been trying to count the time since activation, and I knew that I had a few more seconds until the blackout was over. I had to disarm him by then or he would shoot us all. I heard another gunshot and heard something shatter in the bathroom. Just another moment and the light would come back. I jumped to my feet and charged toward where I had heard the shot. I had to get this right. The light came back on and Gideon saw me. He tried to level the gun at me, but I jumped and threw my weight at him in a desperate dropkick. My weight sent him flying toward the open door. He was reeling and tried to recover near the railing outside the room. I saw that he was too far away, and when I got back to my feet, and I knew that I had miscalculated. He got back to his feet and once again took aim at me. I thought that it was over until I heard several shots from behind. Salazar's new collector looked down at the multiple wounds in his chest and let out a pained gasp as he toppled over the railing and into the pool just as I had fallen into earlier. Something told me that he would not be climbing out. I looked behind and saw Lucia, her own gun still smoking. She was panting and still bleeding bad from the wound on her shoulder, but when she saw me smiling at her, she moved up to me and slapped me in the face. I was confused, and then she said, "That's for scaring my sister." As I reeled from the blow with a pained and confused grunt, she pulled me in and kissed me. When she pulled away, she was smiling, and before I could respond, she said, "And that's for saving both of us." I smiled back and thanked her for saving me as well. The relief faded from her face and she winced in pain, as the adrenaline wore off and she was reminded of the fact that she had been shot. I helped her sit down and got a first aid kit from the car, and I helped her dress the wound. Fortunately, it had gone clean in and clean out, but it was still bad. She would need to see a doctor, but it would work for now. I took the small packet of burn ointment in the kit and applied it on a hilariously small portion of the awful burns that I had across my body. The bleeding stab wound was patched up as best as I could as well. I also taped my hands up so that it would not hurt so much to grab things. I felt like complete hell, but I was alive. Carla was still hiding in the bathroom and she refused to come out. I knew the poor thing was likely traumatized by all the events that she just had to witness. Lucia eventually got her to come out and tried to comfort her, and I sat down next to them, completely exhausted. My mind was racing and I had to think of something that we could do. I knew what was likely the only option that I had left, and it terrified me just thinking about it. After a few minutes, I came to a grim acceptance of the truth, and I felt emboldened by the desperate realization that if this did not work, then we would all be dead. I had no idea how I would do it, but I had no other option. The only way to stop this once and for all would be to take out Salazar. If I stopped him, Sarah would be safe, Lucia and her sister would be safe. We all would be. I stood up and spoke to them both. "We have to get out of here. The police will get here eventually, and there's a lot more to explain here than I think we can. Worse still, Salazar is going to send somebody else eventually. You two need to get somewhere safe. I need to get back to the office." Lucia looked confused and upset by my declaration. She said, "Why in the world would you go back there?" I smiled and replied, "To tell the boss that he can't fire me. I quit." I knew that it was a bad idea. Lucia stared in disbelief and looked like she would slap me again. She protested, but she was injured and her sister was terrified. The only way that they could stay safe was to get out of here and start running. They had packed everything back up in their car and they were about to depart. She walked back to me and took my hands in hers. She looked like she would break down again and spoke softly. "You don't have to do this. We can still run away, all of us." I shook my head slowly and responded, "I could, but we would never know peace. There's only one way that we can be safe, that our families can be safe. I do need you to help me with something important though. Lucia was already nodding her head and said, "Anything." I continued, "Please, I need you to check on Sarah and her mom. More importantly, if you don't hear from me in the next 2 hours, I need you to take Sarah with you. Convince her mother however you can. Kidnap them if you need to. Mr. Salazar might not consider this debt as settled even if he kills me. He might not leave my family alone." She nodded her head once more, and I was about to turn and leave myself when she held onto my hand and whispered, "Henry, thank you for everything. I wish that things turned out differently between us." I smiled ruefully and replied, "I do too. Take care, Lucia, and maybe I'll see you around." She let go and returned to her car, and in a moment they were driving away. I waved goodbye somberly and staggered back to my own car. I sat down and turned on the engine. The air blowing from the fan caused a wave of pain, and I was reminded of how badly my skin was still burned. I was bruised and battered in a dozen different places, stabbed and lacerated in a dozen more, and I was about to confront my former boss, a man who likely had dozens of trinkets that could turn me inside out in an instant. Every scrap of self-preservation and common sense that I had begged me to not go back and face him. Yet I did not see what other choice I had. If we ran, he would find us. If we hid, he would find us. I had to do this for everyone. I drove on toward my old place of employment and my confrontation with Mr. Salazar. The place looked closed, and I had no idea if Salazar was even there. Something in my gut told me that he would be. No doubt, sitting in that back room like always. He likely didn't care at all that I had come to kill him. The concept was probably laughable to him. I allowed myself to hope for a fleeting moment that it might cause him to underestimate me and slip up. One chance was all that I needed. I tried to steel my resolve and took inventory of the items at my disposal. I had my Beretta and the weapons that I had recovered from the attackers back at the motel. Lucia kept one of these submachine guns, and I took the others and what trinkets that Gideon had on his person. All in all, I had 2 handguns, an MP5, a few extra magazines for each, and the strange knife that Gideon had used to stab me. I laughed quietly to myself when I considered the gravity of the task before me. I probably had enough here to storm a normal building with normal guards, but even armed as I was, I feared that it wouldn't be enough. Hell, that was assuming that I even got a shot off. I inspected the inventory of more exotic means next and saw a few things in Gideon's pack that could help. The darkener was useful, but used up already. It was certainly used well since it had saved my life. I didn't think that it could be used more than once, and I certainly didn't know if the device could be recharged or not. I kept searching and saw that there was another skeleton key, which was nice since mine had burned up in the destruction of my former pack. There was one little red orb in the bottom of the bag, and I flinched when I saw it, careful not to activate it. I had never used this thing before, but I recognized it as the imploder that I saw in action at the motel. I grinned as I knew that I had at least one solid weapon that could turn the tide of a bad situation. The rest of the items appeared to be mundane supplies and some of Gideon's personal effects, but no extra items or useful arcana. I also found a hastily drawn collection note from Salazar that had mine and Lucia's names on it. Interestingly, mine had been listed as an old worker's loyalty. Mr. Salazar really had tried to get me back on board. Whatever the case, at least, he never viewed me as completely expendable. I felt an odd sense of pride, but resolved that nothing could bring me back to working for that psychotic weirdo. Maybe I could use that sentiment to my advantage. I considered, though, how hard it would be to successfully lie about my intentions to a man who could literally read minds. No deceit would not play well in this case. It would have to be force. I took a deep, steadying breath and got out of the car and slowly moved toward the building. I gripped the MP5 in both hands and moved carefully toward the front, checking for any movement. I slowly reached for the door handle with one hand and grabbed it to check if it was locked. The handle did not give, so I reached into my bag and withdrew the skeleton key. I placed the key in the lock and I turned it. Suddenly, I heard something that sounded like a wave rushing down a slope. I fell back from the door in surprise as I narrowly avoided a torrent of caustic liquid that fell from above. I got back to my feet as quickly as I could and watched in horror as the MP5 that I had dropped down when I fell was dissolved in a matter of seconds. Nothing that I knew of could dissolve a weapon like that so quickly. I shuddered as I watched the display and considered the terrible result had I been a second slower. The pool lingered for a few seconds, but then it just fizzled out and dried as suddenly as it had appeared. The whole display was impossible, and like almost everything that Salazar employed, made a mockery of the natural laws and physics of the world. I withdrew the heavy pistol that I had recovered from Gideon and pressed on, gingerly opening the door to the shop. As soon as I stepped through the threshold, the door slammed shut behind me and I heard a loud metallic sound, like a heavy bar falling behind the door on the other side. As expected, I tried the door and it was locked. I had not been planning on going back anyway, but I no longer had the option even if I had wanted to. I spun around and raised my pistol at the sound that I heard coming from further on into the place. The sound grew louder and static-laden, and I realized it was some sort of intercom that I had never realized this store had before. Sure enough, I heard a familiar voice and Mr. Salazar greeted me as I walked in.
"Hello, Henry. I'm sorry about that. You never know what sort of scoundrels and rogues might try and break in. You are a bit late, though. I was expecting you back a bit sooner. You look a little rough. I hope that you're feeling all right."
The mock courtesy was grating and I was about to respond when the voice continued.
"You know, I try and run a tight ship here, and I have to make an example of the people who make costly mistakes. I promise you that it's not personal. I never said it too often, but I do respect your work. You have a certain tenacity and knack for survival that is hard to replicate, and make an excellent quality in a collector. A bit more of that knack for survival would have benefited young Gideon. He had a talent as well, but was a bit too eager and reckless. Qualities that led to his unfortunate demise. No hard feelings about that either, just so that you know. I mean, even better since I don't have to pay him. He wouldn't have lasted too long anyways."
There was a brief, sardonic chuckle and he continued.
"I know what must be going through your mind right now. You likely came here on some fool's crusade to stop whatever nefarious plot that I have to exact revenge against you. Well, I assure you that Gideon's offer was genuine. I have no desire to kill you unless you force me to. Even though you failed to collect from Lucia, I admit that I put you in a difficult position. I should have never asked you to do it. So even now I can assure you that if you stand down and just return to your family, that can be the end of it. Why, you can even have your old job back if you want it. Replacing you ended up being harder than I had first imagined."
Another harsh laugh, followed by a pause awaiting an answer. I hated myself for admitting it, but I did consider the promise of safety and the knowledge that Sarah and Nancy wouldn't be dragged into all of this. But I could never condemn Lucia and her sister to being pursued to the ends of the earth by this maniac. That was all besides the fact that trusting him at this point seemed ludicrous, since he had set me on fire the last time that I had disobeyed. I banished the thought and stayed firm in my course of action. I tried to bolster my courage and shouted my answer back. "No, you might let me go, but you would always hold the threat to my family and friends over me. Lucy and her sister deserve to live their lives without the fear of you lurking in their shadows. I don't care that she stole that item from you. It is better off with her sister than that ghoul, Mr. Beckett. No more deals, no more manipulation. I'm here to stop this whole twisted game. Not just for them, but all the other people you've tricked and deceived with your so-called deals. Some might have been more deserving than others, but the karma, if there ever was any, was always incidental to the main goal. The goal of increasing your collection, your influence. So no, I'm not here to talk, not here to work. I'm here to put a stop to this or die trying. I stood my ground and expected the items on the shelves to spring to life and attack me after my defiant statement. But instead, there was a long pause and Salazar's voice took on a tone of apparent disappointment.
Very well, if you insist. I suppose the time for chin-wagging is over and the time for judgment has come. Head to the back office and we can, settle things. And good luck and may the best bipedal killer win.
I shifted uncomfortably as I stood there. The last part of what he said was strange as usual. I did not want to proceed, since I didn't believe for a moment that his office in sight of his beloved collection was not trapped to all hell. Though the resigned tone that I heard in his response almost had an air of authenticity. Even though he threatened judgment, I considered that he might actually want to face me directly. Maybe it was some sort of pride or ego issue speaking for him. But whatever the case, I had to take the chance now while I had it. I quelled my hesitation and I stepped forward, towards the familiar door leading to the back office and Salazar's collection. I stepped inside and was prepared to fall right back if some lethal trap sprang, or some other horrible event occurred. I was surprised when nothing happened. I carefully moved through the threshold into the poorly lit area. Most of the mess from earlier had been cleared up. The broken glass was gone as well as all the other debris. In fact, a lot of the artifacts, creepy bottles, and other such items appeared to be gone. It was strange, the place looked sort of empty, at least with what I could see. It was still as dark as ever though. I noticed what looked like a dark curtain hanging about halfway into the display room, cutting off the half that I had entered from, to the back where Mr. Salazar's desk was. Had he put this up for some sort of trick or gimmick? I figured it didn't matter and I took another few steps inside, looking left and right for any sign of Salazar. I was startled and I almost fired a shot when I saw a humanoid figure to my left, by one of the display cases. I stopped myself when I saw that it wasn't him. At first, it appeared as if it was a slender woman standing near the case. The figure did not move and I saw why when I stepped closer. It was some sort of mannequin or a doll with a red ballerina-style leotard on. It looked like a new addition, definitely not a display that I had seen before. Its face was disturbingly lifelike, but it stood rigid with an almost pained expression gazing directly ahead. The visible portions where skin would be looked disturbingly realistic as well. I had the sudden urge to poke the thing just to make sure that it did not move. I didn't like how this new display felt like it was watching me. I looked at the placard near the base of the stand that the mannequin had been stood up on and it read, "Body of work collected from H. Jaspin." As I stared at the creepy figure, I felt an odd buzzing in my ears. Before I could even conjecture what was going on, I heard the voice of Mr. Salazar on the intercom again.
That's right, you never saw one of these before. She was a tough one to get. That job saw the death of one of my favorite collectors. His replacement barely survived, and even now the people that the proud tailor would kill to get their prototype back. You simply must visit them sometime. They do fine work. But Lucy here is their best by far.
I had no idea what he was talking about, but I figured when he mentioned a name that it must be the doll's name. I looked to my right at the sound of the curtain separating the room being drawn back. Finally, I saw him. Salazar was sitting at his desk, still partially obscured by the shadows. He didn't move or get up as I slowly moved closer to him. I wasn't sure if he expected me to sit with him. I didn't know if I would get another chance like this, and so I used the opportunity to just go for it. I raised the pistol and fired several times to make sure. To my surprise, not a single shot had rung out. Somehow, despite my effort, the gun had failed several times in a row. All I heard was an empty clicking sound. I inspected the chamber and no round had even made it there. I went to check the magazine. I knew that I had confirmed it was loaded before. I was confused and horrified when in place of a magazine, was a small rolled up piece of paper. I stood there dumbfounded as I heard the intercom ring out in laughter again. Mr. Salazar's voice boomed through the room as he said,
"I'm looking for this."
I heard a metallic clatter behind me. I turned around to try and see what had happened and saw the now empty magazine of my pistol on the ground. I unfurled the piece of paper where the previously full clip had been and read the note. "Don't bring a gun to a knife fight." I was confused by the odd note and more so how it had been swapped for the ammunition to the pistol. I grabbed another one and tried to reload, but it felt too light. I looked inside and instead of rounds of ammunition, more notes were delicately folded into them. I dropped the useless pistol and read another note stuck in the clip. "Seriously, you might want to use that knife, and just a heads up. Give us a show and don't disappoint and die too quickly. I have not gotten to watch your work before, and I'm practically giddy with excitement. Die well, Henry." I knew that this was some sort of trick and I was about to reach for my Beretta to try again. Yet I got the feeling that I should grab my knife just in case. I pulled out the large and ornate-looking knife that Gideon had stabbed me with earlier that day. As soon as I had it in my hand, I heard something. It sounded like metal grinding against metal in some softer material. The harsh sound lasted only a moment and then it vanished. I readied myself for another trap, but I was surprised when I heard a sound behind me. I whipped around to see what it was, just in time to see a knife flying through the air at me. Only dumb luck allowed me to evade the blade by falling on my back. I sat up as fast as I could and tried to see where it had come from. I noticed at that moment that the mannequin was no longer standing by the cabinet. I shook my head in pointless denial as I heard rapid clicking and snapping sounds, and then I saw her moving towards me with insane speed. I could barely process the jarring image of a mannequin dressed as a ballerina, hurling knives at me and charging into attack. At that moment I knew that I had been fooled. Of course she would be alive. The doll or mannequin was a ruse. Salazar had likely hired an assassin to kill me, so that he wouldn't have to get his own hands dirty. My stupor broke as she crashed into me and I had to roll several times after crashing to the ground to avoid a flurry of vicious stabs directed at me. I was being pressed hard and I had to get up and fight back or I was going to be killed by this murderous woman that Salazar had sicked on me. She pressed the attack, unrelenting and in a manic frenzy that I had never witnessed anybody capable of. Blind luck was all that allowed me not to be stabbed a dozen times. As I was pushed more and more, I soon ran out of room to move. The wall was to my back and several stabs missed their mark, but my luck ran out and a couple of slashes cut me across the chest in a painful arc. She paused for a moment and bowed to me and then to Salazar. I was angered by the gloating action, but it gave me a moment to rally. I tightened my grip on my own knife and I lunged towards her. The woman was not expecting my own speed and in one fast stabbing motion, I had plunged the knife into her chest. In a moment of triumph, I thought that I had ended the fight, but I wasn't prepared for what happened instead. The unblinking eyes of the woman looked down at the knife buried into her chest. Without uttering a sound or any type of acknowledgement of pain, she grabbed the handle and wrenched it free. There was a jarring sound like metal scraping against metal, and something liquid-like. The woman was holding both knives now and black fluid was leaking out of a gaping chest wound, which by all rights should have killed her. I looked on in confusion and horror as she returned my bewildered stare with an expressionless look of her own. Even worse, she wielded both blades now and charged at me once more. As I dodged a flurry of new attacks and suffered wound after wound, the staticky voice of Mr. Salazar hooted with laughter in the background. I backed up into one of the heavy antique cabinets and managed to sidestep another stab directed at me. I ducked forward under another strike and managed to seize a wrist and direct the blade into the thick wood of the cabinet, trapping it there momentarily. I got behind her and tried to grab the other knife that she held while controlling her arms from behind. She was impossibly strong and I could not hold on long and I felt my grip loosening. And then as I tried to find some other leverage to use to regain control, I nearly screamed and almost let go when her head rotated 180 degrees around to face me. Before I could respond to the insane sight, she spat out some black fluid from her mouth. The liquid came right at me and it felt hot, very hot, almost like it was boiling. I fell back and let go of her, but I was not fast enough and some touched my face. I felt the horrific scalding sting of whatever sort of superheated liquid it had spat at me. The woman, doll, monster, or whatever she was, belched forth another stream of searing liquid and I knew that I had to stop it somehow. While its head was still turned around, I ducked under the burning projectile and grabbed for the knife embedded in the cabinet. I wrenched it free and stabbed the thing in the neck. The strike was successful and I tried to drag the blade along its neck and shift it in a carving motion to try and behead the monstrous thing. Against a normal human vertebra, I would have succeeded already. Yet to my horror and dismay, I felt that I heard the blade of the knife catch some harder material like another form of metal. The knife was now hopelessly jammed in the thing's neck, and before I could even try and wrench it free, I felt the horrible searing pain of the other knife being driven into my side. I fell back and painfully disengaged, the action sending a wave of agony through my entire body. I rolled to the side as the monster tried to follow up. My ears started ringing and my heart hammered in my chest. I heard Mr. Salazar interrupt the violent bedlam of the fight with the occasional chuckle over the intercom. He had a lot of confidence that this thing would finish me off. This whole time he never moved from his chair, just watched on and laughed. I supposed his confidence in that monster was well placed. I was losing blood as badly as I was losing the fight. I would have to do something drastic. I waited for the mannequin abomination to try and lunge at me once more, and rather than dive to the side or fall back, I charged towards it. The move was deliberate and as I expected, I wasn't fast enough to avoid taking another hit as it stabbed me in the shoulder. The pain almost made me drop the item that I had pulled out as I was performing the suicidal charge. It was a small red orb. I dropped it behind me as I rushed through and barged over the creature, and then I dove forward and prayed that I would be out of the radius of the effect. I clung to the floor as I heard the vacuum-like sucking sound. I looked behind to see blackish blood and folds of a rubbery skin-like material all combined near the center of the blast. I breathed a sigh of relief when I saw the mangled ruin of my attacker. But then, to my horror, I saw the upper body of the thing still remained and it still moved. The fake skin was gone and I saw a metallic and plaster cast surface that looked horrible. Where internal organs should be, there were gears coated in what looked like real muscle. Metal and plaster were mixed with real across its skeleton and a thick black substance flowed in place of normal blood. It had no lower half, those components had been imploded. Yet, even in the state that it was in, the blank eyes in the thing's skull still burned with a very human rage and it crawled toward me. Its knife digging into the ground as it pulled itself along, still intent on slaughtering me. I had nothing left. I was bleeding bad and felt lightheaded. I had one final chance. I managed to reach for my Beretta that was concealed under my shirt. I drew it and prayed that it hadn't lost its clip too somehow. I was rewarded for my efforts with the satisfying rapport of a well-placed shot directly at the thing's eye. I put another one in for good measure, and that finally caused the monster to cease whatever horrible motive force had animated it. There was a long pause where I stared at the remains of my attacker, unbelieving that it would truly be dead. And then I looked to Salazar and my vision doubled. I felt lightheaded and knew that I might pass out soon from all the blood loss. Through my stupor, I heard the surprised and bemused cry of Salazar. It was strange, but he sounded almost happy, like he was cheering after a good show. I forced myself up to a posture where I could take aim at him. I swear that I saw the man slowly shaking his head despite the surprised laughter coming from the intercom. In my last moments of consciousness, I aimed through the darkness to where he was sitting, and I fired every round that remained. When the final round was spent, the figure in the chair slumped forward, and I knew as I passed out that Mr. Salazar would not be able to hurt us anymore. I thought that I had died along with Salazar and his monster that day. By some miracle, though, I woke up in a hospital bed, badly hurt but alive. I knew someone must have saved me. And then my eyes focused and I saw my guardian angel. Lucia was there standing over me and smiling as she saw me regaining consciousness. I couldn't believe that she was there and that she had found me in time. I tried to move, but I saw that I was hooked up to a dozen different monitoring devices and IVs. I weakly tried to sit up, but I could barely do that. Lucia saw me try to move and put her hand on my chest and said, "Don't try to get up, you need to rest. Henry, you did it. I can't believe you actually did it. We can finally be free again, free to live our lives." I saw her start to cry tears of joy. I managed to mutter a few words in response. "Yeah, we are free, but unemployed now, so it's not all gravy. Worst of all, I don't have health insurance anymore, so I'll probably have to find a new illicit occupation to pay for this hospital stay." I cracked a sarcastic smile at her, and she and I both laughed a bit at my attempt at lightening the mood. We did share a moment of deep relief at the new feeling of relative safety. I asked her how she had got there, and when I told her to leave and take our families to safety, she looked slightly apologetic and told me, "I got Carla, Sarah, and Nancy to a safe place. We were going to run, but I couldn't leave you. I had to check. I had to try and help. I could not let you die in there alone. When I finally arrived, I found you in the back room in a puddle of your own blood. I managed to get you out of there just in time to see a small army show up. The place got raided after we left by some paramilitary organization. It looked like they were with ArcLight, the same defense contractor that the Chalmers contract was associated with. I don't know exactly why they were there, but they were likely looking for Salazar. Never mind all of that right now. Somebody's here to see you." I wondered who she meant, and then I was overjoyed to see Sarah step in behind her and lean over and give me a hug. She was holding back tears at seeing me in the sad state that I was in, but she held on to me and asked, "Daddy, what happened? How did you get hurt?" I looked back at her, surprised how much she was growing every day. I silently resolved to make more time for her so that I could be a bigger part of her life. I smiled and told her, "It's a long story, but I'll tell you later. Thanks for visiting, Sarah Bear. It means a lot." I was content just to see her smile. Unfortunately, my reunion was cut short as I started to feel woozy and almost passed out again. I just needed more time to rest. Indeed, for the first time, it felt truly safe to do so. I felt like everything just might be okay. In the next few months, I recovered and spent more time with Sarah. I wanted to be a better dad, and I had a bit of savings from the money that I had made while working for Salazar. When I considered the money that I made working for him, I also thought about the fate of his vaunted collection. I wondered what would happen to all of his powerful relics. He had spent a lifetime collecting all of the unbelievable artifacts, but had no apparent inheritors to his trove of items. Had he stored them away somewhere to be forgotten by time, or would someone find them and put them to these same nefarious uses? I didn't know, and I didn't care just then. I needed a break. Lucia and I spent more time together as well. We had something special that I didn't want to lose either. Though I had to admit that I worried for her sister, I still didn't understand what the borrowed time would do to her life. Would she be immortal to all but violent death? I didn't know, but it was strange to consider. Things for that time had been going well, and we thought that we had earned our freedom and a hope for a chance at a better life. Yet some things are never truly over, and I received a letter at home recently that shattered my illusion that everything would be alright, and it left me shaken to my core. There was no return label, but it was addressed to me. My knuckles turned white while gripping the paper with the unmistakable scrawl of a familiar hand. I read on in silent disbelief. "Hello, Henry, I hope this finds you well. You surprised me, you really do not quit. I had a feeling that you would be determined to stop me. I knew that you would also feel obligated to save Miss Ramirez and her sister. I will admit that I was upset at first. Losing the borrowed time was a setback, but since Beckett betrayed me and I was originally going to give it to him, you and Lucia are off the hook. In fact, I should thank you. You helped me get around a little loophole in the deal that I had with him. The contract had certain restrictions to prevent overt ladder-climbing assassinations. As such, I was not allowed to harm Beckett and was forced to honor the arrangement to allow the recovered time to be used by him. He broke the agreement first, though, by trying to cut me out and steal the time when he knew that I was away. He had tried to avoid his obligation to me. Thankfully, you as a newly free agent and no longer my employee, you were under no such restriction. Indeed, Beckett's death was just unfortunate collateral in your vendetta against me. Every man deserves a chance at redemption, and though I will admit that I sometimes doubted that you would make it, you pulled it off. I know you don't like to kill, but in this case, I gave you proper motivation. Though I am slightly hurt that you would so enthusiastically try to kill me, I needed you to do the deed. My hands are clean and I have no recourse against me, but it does have an open seat now. So again, thank you, Henry. I wish you had not so thoroughly destroyed Lucy, though. That one hurt. She was a work of art, and honestly, I hadn't expected you to survive. In that case, she was supposed to have finished the job while also leaving me some plausible deniability. Anyway, please tell Miss Ramirez that Beckett's men will no longer be pursuing her or her sister. We both made sure that he will never be able to again. And don't worry about the shop while I'm gone. I took my collection to a safer place, though I might have misplaced a certain mask required for the optics of my plan. Anyway, I need to stay dead for a while until I can decide where to operate out of for now. I must thank you for dealing with the situation. Chalmers' thugs are convinced that I'm dead, and they have no further need to seek retribution. I may not be the best showman, but I did make it convincing at least now, didn't I? Well, I'm rambling and I apologize. As I said, Beckett's dead, so you're off the hook. Do take care of yourself and your loved ones. And always remember, Henry, be careful who you work for, and always remember that you're a true collector at heart. Take care. Your friend, Ezekiel Salazar. I couldn't believe it. He was alive? I didn't understand how I shot him. I remember hitting him with every round. My mind raced for answers and I was dumbfounded. And then I considered how he kept thanking me for taking care of Beckett. I saw Beckett only once, infirm and in a wheelchair, waiting for the life-giving time that he would never receive. I hadn't killed him, at least not directly. I recalled the fight in the back room and I remembered something strange. I had heard Salazar speak, but only through the intercom system. I never saw him actually speak. The figure in his chair just sat there and watched. He looked exactly like Salazar, but it was as if he could barely move or react. And then I considered Salazar's collection and what he had put in his letter of how he might have misplaced a certain mask. It had been a trick all along, the details of which were apparent at last. Salazar was never worried because he had never been there. He had left already. The person in the chair was Mr. Beckett. The whole fight was a test. He had punished me by giving me a trial, a chance to win my life by fighting that monster. The one thing that he ensured, however, was that it ended the same way. The mask that changed the user's appearance was left behind because it was likely still attached to the cold corpse of Solomon Beckett, buried under the incorrect identity of Salazar. He had somehow managed to trick me into being the triggerman after all, just not against Lucia, but rather against Beckett. I had facilitated some form of assassination that served his interests while believing that I was killing him. All the while he had managed to escape with the perfect cover, no one knowing of his deception until well after he had escaped. After all that we had done, it was not enough. He was still out there, not a present threat, but always there waiting to come back into our lives. I thought that we could move on. I thought that with all the pain and all the struggle that we had bought ourselves a newfound freedom. But we were wrong. We were wrong about everything, and now we need to prepare ourselves for what happens next. I pause and consider what I will do, and in the next instant, I am shocked to see every word in the letter slowly vanishing. I stand in stunned silence as the confession letter explaining his plot transformed into a blank piece of paper. I have to tell Lucia. We have to prepare for the next time that he finds us. I don't know when that will be, but when that time comes, we will have to be ready to see what strange debt has come due. Damon McCory, Rain, Big Country Allen, Smiling Cat, Jerry Ramey, Nelson Asada, Die Screaming, Meat Gasher,